The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Monday evening. Hope everybody is having a great start to your week. I'm, as always, excited to have Greg with me. Greg Salmieri is a professor of philosophy, teaches philosophy at the University of Texas in Austin. He's a senior scholar of philosophy at the Civitas Institute. Yeah, it's always fun to have you on. Thanks for joining me, Greg.
Thanks. It's great to be here. This is my favorite podcast. One of a few that I listen to.
Yeah. Good. So I thought we'd start talking about the new book you have.
Show and tell.
Yeah, you've got it right in front of you. That's great. So two philosophers, Ayn Rand and Aristotle. Maybe tell us a little bit about how this project came together.
Yeah, this is part of the Ayn Rand Society's Philosophical Studies series. So there's an Ayn Rand Society. It's a group of philosophers. We meet usually at American Philosophical Association meetings. There are a few of those a year. We usually meet at the one on the East Coast. Sometimes we skip a year, like last year or this year, and sometimes we do more than one a year. But they're meetings of philosophers interested in Rand. There's a paper, someone comments, and we've sometimes done meetings in other contexts. And over the years, we collect the papers into books. And there have been three prior to this one. There was a book on Ayn Rand's Metaethics, Egoism, and Virtue. So it's a collection of papers that came out of those sessions on ethical issues in Rand. There's a book called Concepts and Their Role in Knowledge, which is an epistemology book. Those two were edited by Alan Goddard and Jim Lennox. The third book in the series was edited by me and Robert Mayu. That was called Foundations of a Free Society, and it's on Rand's political philosophy. And this now is the fourth collection in this series, Two Philosophers, Ayn Rand and Aristotle, and it's on Ayn Rand and Aristotle. And the papers in it come from over a long period of time. So there was a session called Ayn Rand as Aristotelian that the ARS, Ayn Rand Society, did way back in 2005. And some of the papers date back to that. There's a paper by Alan Goddard, Jim Lennox, although his has been much updated by then, Robert Mayu and Fred Miller on different aspects of Rand's philosophy. And since then, we've added more papers coming out of other sessions. I have a paper in there. There are some others, one by Neera Badwar with a comment by Ben Bayer. And a classic paper by Alan Goddard from back in the 70s, maybe the 60s when he first gave it. I can't remember the first year. Oh. On love and philosophy, Aristotelian versus Platonic. He used to go around giving that. I first encountered that as an undergraduate. And it's been available as an audio recording, but this is for the first time when it's released in slightly, edited form as a paper with a postscript he wrote when he taught it to a philosophy graduate seminar in Europe, and a little reflection on the piece by me. So the format is papers and responses or comments or little discussions triggered by them on a wide range of topics, all in somehow or other comparing Ayn Rand and Aristotle.
I think I saw Alan give that talk in Dallas in maybe 1989.
Yeah, it was. He would do it across his whole career, and with little adjustments over the years, but basically the same talk. And it was a really, really good, insightful talk. Very interesting in its presentation of love. A lot of objectivism in the talk, and my kind of postscript to it brings out the ways in which he's drawing on material from objectivism even more than is at the front of the page in the talk.
So how can people get a copy?
You can anywhere where you buy books. So it's on Amazon. It's available in a very expensive hardcover and an affordable paperback and Kindle.
Good.
I think the paperback and Kindle are somewhere in the $30 to $40 range, which is reasonable for an academic book. The hardcover is just for libraries, and I don't know, probably $100 or something. Okay. But buy the paperback or the Kindle. There's a lot of good stuff in it. I'm very pleased with my piece in it, my main piece in it on it's called Man's Life as a Standard of Value in the Ethics of Ayn Rand and Aristotle. And I've talked in various forms on that topic at different conferences, but this is a much expanded and more technical presentation. There's a lot in there, some of which is new, not just on the comparison, but on how to understand aspects of Rand's ethics. I think certainly philosophy students will find it valuable. Jim Lennox's opening chapter on Rand's view of axioms is there's a lot to learn from, and there are comments on that by Michael Paramatsis and Jason Ryans. There's Paramatsis is a scholar of Aristotle. Jason, people listeners will be familiar with, I expect.
Yeah.
Chapter on Ayn Rand's theory of concepts related to Aristotle's view of concepts by Alan Godhelf, a kind of useful sort of follow up on that by a scholar of Aristotle's physical works, Andrea Falcone, talking about things in Aristotle that are parallel to the methods Rand discusses and Alan discusses in Rand. My piece has a comment on it by Joe Karbowski, who's written a really fantastic book on Aristotle's ethical method, and he pushes me a little bit on things I say about methodology, and I have a follow-up response to him on that. Let me see if I'm missing anything. There's a exchange. Oh, Fred Miller has a chapter on Rand's ethics, also part of that section on ethics with mine. That one comes before mine. There's a section by Neera Badwar on virtue of character, and Ben Bayer has a response to her, and Neera responds back to Ben. And then Robert Mayu has a chapter on literary aesthetics, and then the chapter by Alan on love and philosophy that we mentioned earlier.
Good.
So it's quite runs the gamut of from metaphysics to sex,
Yeah.
and some politics, everything in between.
That's good.
And yeah, students of philosophy who are interested in Rand at all, I think will find it very valuable.
Good. Any plans for another edition, or
Well, there will.
you need some conferences before you do
We
that?
need some conferences to build up a backlog before we have the next book in the series. We have some ideas and a couple of papers in store that will likely be in the next book whenever it comes out, but it'll be years and years before the next one of these. There'll be other books that I might be involved with out in the meantime, but this is the first. The next one of these will be a while.
Good. So I gave a talk at Texas last week on what is America, and kind of the aspiration that is America. And I thought we'd maybe dig into the whole question of America, the state it's in today, and then looking back and trying to figure out how we got here, how we got to the place where we are today. So maybe if you could give us a kind of a broad assessment of American, I don't know, culture as it stands today, and then we can kind of dig into, start working backwards to the past.
I mean, we're in a scary place today. I just saw a post on social media from a mutual friend, Sandra Schwartz, talking about remembering the bicentennial, and now here we are 50 years later, and how much less hopeful she and other people seem to be. And it's not like 1976 was a banner year in America's history, but I think there was a lot more optimism and confidence in America than there is right now, when I think we're really at a low point, and at a low point in everything that's valuable and great about the country. Not that things have never been worse in any respect, but there's a kind of tremendous dip, a tremendous negative trajectory right now. So if we're going to talk about the country as it is now, let's first look at like the broad now, like the 90s through today as now versus the 1770s and 1870s and 1970s.
Yeah.
And think about that, because I think a lot of what's going on in the country right now, take right now to be the last 10 years, comes from people not valuing and caring about America. Thinking that America is in effect is no good. It either was never any good. It's all been about, stealing land and dispossessing people and enslaving people. That you think of the whole, anti-colonialist narrative about America, the kind of hard leftist narrative, or this view that I think even a lot of objectivists share, and certainly a lot of people on the right share, that there was something great about America, but it's all gone. The kind of view of America where it peaked in 1776, or maybe, 1870 or something like that. There's the Declaration of Independence, and that was good. And maybe 19th century capitalism was good, but now there's none of it left. We had the New Deal, we've had the Great Society, and here we are, just another country, nothing special about us. And if you really think we have nothing to lose, then you don't think there's a difference between America and North Korea, America and Iran, or America and Russia or Poland, to take places that are, a lot better than North Korea or Iran, but less good than us, or America and France, right? And I think I see these as in different strata. Like France is a lot better than Russia, or but Poland's better than Russia. But like if you compare America to all these other countries around the world, you can say, at least putting aside, the last few months or the last few years, America's a lot better off. And is that a coincidence to our past? Is it like we're riding on the fumes of our past, maybe, or just for different reasons we're good now? And I don't think it is. I mean, there's a way in which we're writing on the past. Rand talked about the American sense of life, and that's a vestige of some earlier Enlightenment view. But I think it's really important to think about, in thinking about what we need to preserve and to reinvigorate and what we have to lose, to think about, like, in what form what's good about America now is continuous with, part of, a way in which the founding spirit of America is still alive and present in institutions, in people's souls. And my sense of American history is that there's this strand of Enlightenment optimism, of individualism, of respect for rights, of egoism, that's not articulated philosophically always, but that's there. And that does have some philosophical articulation in our founding documents, which we always go back to, and in some, marquee things from American history, but that exists in the culture, in the spirit of the people, in the business, in the economy, and that asserts itself in different forms that are not always obvious, and that are correctives to a lot of the things that have gone wrong with the country.
So give us some examples of where it asserts itself. So where the spirit still seems to
Yeah.
exist.
So if you think about the kind of laws that Ayn Rand's decrying in the 60s, the antitrust laws, the ability of the FCC to censor, those things have not been taken off the books, but they have been muted. They have been rendered less effective. And why? How did that happen? Well, there are laws that make it possible for people to be autocrats, to be authoritarians, for the president to boss people around. But Americans don't want to boss people around and don't want to be bossed around. And by and large, people who are put in positions where they're given too much discretionary power, as courts, as particular bureaucrats, even as presidents in some cases, but especially the lower people in these administrative agencies and the people they're dealing with, the lawyers who are working for them, try to look for things that make things predictable, that mute power, that don't leave things to people's arbitrary discretion. And when they don't, people react and get upset at them. There was a big pushback to what Newton M. Minow was doing in the 60s with the FCC, the attempt to kind of frighten and strong-arm television stations that Ayn Rand was so exercised about. But she wasn't the only one who was exercised about it. More conventional figures were too, in a less profound way. I don't know if people know, but the SS Minnow, the ship on Gilligan's Island, is named after this guy. He was saying, we need more highbrow content, not stupid sitcoms. And they made a stupid sitcom and named the ship after him. Like, there was a we don't want to be pushed around. We don't want people telling us what to do spirit. And so there was a felt need to kind of draw back on that, right? And a lot of the things that people are frustrated about, the kind of bloat in the federal bureaucracies, the kind of cautiousness, the what we call the blob in the State Department. These things aren't good, but they're not as bad as they can be. And part of what they are is a kind of pragmatist pushback or pullback from too much discretionary power. Norms that come into place and get accepted for how to use that power, that makes it more predictable, that make lawyers able to tell people what to do, that let business and life function. The obsession with putting things under due process, right, and thinking about what processes do, which is really important, and we do need due process, and we're losing it with ICE and so forth, and that's something to talk about. But lots of things have been protected under due process language that really belong elsewhere. But what is that? We want orderliness, we want rule of law, we don't want to be under people's caprice. And so people find ways to push back on it. So that's a way in which we pulled back from some of the most leftist kind of things. Or not leftist, because both left and right have been offenders under those things.
Yeah, statist, yeah.
Yeah, statist kind of things. But also there's if you think about the privacy doctrine of the Supreme Court that all these cases were decided under, including Roe and leading up to Obergefell and all these kinds of cases, that people have a right to privacy, which was overturned, at least overturned in its application to abortion rights in Dobbs. Where did that come from? It came from an attempt to wrestle back some sphere of individual liberties after the Lochner court cases were overturned. It used to be seen that we had expansive rights about who we deal with, including in the economic realm. When those rights got struck down, or denied when the court affirmed the New Deal, I think there was a need to find, for people who wanted to not give the government and not give Congress power over everything, there was a need to find something that limited it in the spheres where people were most obviously overreaching if the government tells you what to do. And so this idea that you have privacy over, your own life and your own body and so forth became a doctrine that got, kind of a little bloated and used for things that really it's not the right doctrine for, but it was an attempt to have a kind of rearguard action to protect liberty. And it's not a coincidence that in overturning it, the court compared the use of it for abortion rights to the Lochner court's decision. You're finding rights in the Constitution. But a lot
You
of
think that all
Go ahead.
that all was a product of the fact that they don't really understand individual rights and couldn't generalize it? The proper conception of rights?
Well, that I think you have to go back to the New Deal era court for, right?
Mhm.
So we get a rejection of the Lochner view, which I think was defending rights, and a seeing of that as reading economics and into the Constitution. And you need a legal scholar to who knows more of the history than I do in detail to explain just how it happened. But there was a kind of anti-rights move that happened at that time, and then since then there's been an attempt to get some rights back, not explicitly understood as rights, but some feeling of no, we don't want the government here. We feel like we need freedom in this area, and so the due process clause gets expanded to cover certain things, and the idea of substantive due process, and the idea of a developing right to privacy and penumbras. These are kind of I think if you embrace the whole doctrine of right, then you need the Lochner court doctrine back, and you need economic rights too, or freedom in the economic realm too. But when people aren't recognizing the need for that, they look for these smaller ways to get some of it back. And the reason why I'm pointing this all out is I think we need to understand our politics as a kind of compromises that have been happening for decades and generations of no explicit universal recognition of the rights that we need to defend our lives, and yet a spirit in the culture that wants to be free, wants individualism, and various ways in which once the rights are knocked down, some kind of simulacra of them or something that can pinch hit for parts of them gets rebuilt. But the thing is imperfect, it's bad, it has problems with it. People resent it in part for good reasons and in part for bad reasons. And then it gets knocked down, and then either something else good grows in its place, or what's happening now is we're having kind of needless tearing down of it.
So part of where the American spirit has kind of been upheld is in the procedures we have in our government, which most of the critics of government don't see, and just see the bloat and the exertion. Where else do you see kind of the remnants of the American spirit in our culture?
I mean, one place you also find it in how law is passed is used is in what laws are effectively unenforced and regarded as dead letter. I mean, there was a long period of time, and probably still in some places, where sodomy laws were on the books, but just not enforced, right? And so gay people weren't persecuted legally, even though the laws were on the books. That was the case for a long time with people employing immigrants and with immigrants. The system under which business functioned through the 90s and early 2000s was one in which it was illegal to come here to work without, except for the very small number of people who could, but it was mostly ignored. And that was, I think, a comparatively just system. It was not just that it was illegal, but it was just that the worst of the laws were under prosecuted, ignored, prosecuted only in exceptional cases, and so forth. And that allowed the economy to function. It allowed the American spirit to be renewed as it has to be by influx of people who come here for the freedom that this country offers. If we were a country just of people born here, we'd immediately lose what makes America distinctive spiritually as well as in other respects. We are a country of people who've come here because we value the freedom and opportunity and the descendants of those people. And all of that was, I think, kept living and functioning by a system that overlooked illegal immigration for a long time, and that now, of course, there's a real backlash against. Um, so that's another place in which you see it in the culture. Um, so these are the kinds I'm interested in particular in the places where you see it interacting in the system that we live under, the legal
Mhm.
system that we live under, which isn't just the laws, but also the customs and procedures for how the laws are enforced, and which has much wrong with it. But also what I want to become more sensitive to and have been trying to over the past years is what things are right about it. Because by anyone who's not insane's account, it's way better than the system under which most of humanity has lived for most of history. And if we want to change it or reform it, we want to think both about what we want to preserve and what we want to change.
Yeah, I mean, I think you saw coming out of the 80s an attempt not to change the laws or get rid of laws, but to reinterpret them in a way that was a little bit more consistent with the American spirit, and that seems to be going. Antitrust is another one. So just like illegal immigration was on the books, antitrust was used less. It was still used in horrific ways, but it was used a lot less starting in the late 1980s, and that's come back with a vengeance with Trump's first term, and then Biden accelerated. Now they basically completely adopted the Biden doctrine regarding antitrust.
Yeah, there was a doctrines that limited how much it would be used, right? Some of
Hmm.
them are court doctrines, and they may still be in effect. We'll see what the courts rule in some of the worst
Yeah.
cases. But some of them were just in part from the courts, but legal theory about how the regulators, what cases they would bring and which ones they wouldn't. If what the company's doing is in the public interest, quote, which doesn't mean anything, but what it functionally means is if you can't come up with some way in which people are paying more due to what the alleged monopolist is doing, there's a lot higher bar to raise a suit.
Yep.
And this was the regime under which things were running, and you got a concerted effort to undo that. Lina Khan, I think, is the real
Yep.
bad guy here. Certainly the worst. I mean, she was someone who was on my radar as a horror before Biden appointed her to the
She's
to the
she's a good example of the
FCC.
influence of academics and intellectuals, right?
Yeah, she made waves with I think a law school thesis that got published on basically why we need to break up Amazon, and then she was empowered to start to do it. And we'll see what happens. She's gone now, but her ideas are still in place. We don't have a more tech or business friendly regime now, so
Yeah.
we'll see what happens.
So those are still the remnants. So maybe talk about how those are being, and we start with Lena Khan's a good example in the current regime, but what are some of the things that really scare you in terms of the unwinding of that in with Trump 2.0?
Yeah, I mean the real turning point in a way is Trump 1.0, and
Yep.
we'd not had a president before who was aggressively and assertively anti-reality in the way Trump is. He makes things up. He doesn't pretend he's not making things up, and he kind of dares you to go along with it. It's a kind of loyalty oath. It's a kind of flagrant also,
Yeah.
irrationalizing. And a character who's like that cannot lead a free country. And a country that's led by someone like that cannot be free. It either rejects it or it kind of bends to that authoritarian impulse. It's an authoritarian way of thinking. And there was enough, there were a lot of guardrails in America, not just the literal constitutional guardrails, but all of these institutional procedures and ways things are done and so forth, and personnel in the various, what sometimes called the deep state, but is really just the business end of the state, the personnel needed to do things, who had a whole bunch of norms and ways that, things were in some cases too sclerotic, but ways that all formed as a bulwark against too aggressive change for the good or bad, but in this case for the bad, and that were a bulwark against kind of a dictatorial functioning. And that the story of the first Trump administration was the story of those guardrails eroding.
Mm-hmm.
And a best case scenario for a Biden administration or for a next administration from the party opposite Trump would have been kind of mustering a coalition of people to try to rebuild, to try to move away from the particular issues that were dividing Democrats and Republicans on policy, but thinking about there are things we're worried about, a president being too unchecked here. This last president was saying he wanted all kinds of tariffs that a lot of people, even in his own party, didn't think should be imposed the way he was saying. And of course, he didn't do them, just a little bit around the edges. Maybe now that he's out of office, we could think about revisiting what powers the president has for tariffs. That Congress could have just changed them. There was all kinds of concerns about the president pardoning people he shouldn't have. There could have been a constitutional amendment made to draw in the pardon power, but there was no even talk about doing that. And we had really promiscuous and kind of gross uses of pardons by Biden, right, on his way out. And so instead of any real attempt to address any of these issues or even real rhetoric around how we would address them, you could imagine an amendment about the pardon power being spun up and not passing, but it was part of the discussion. No, none of that happened, right? Even though it was known that this was a risk. And so we didn't have any of that. And we have Trump coming back into power now, pardoning basically thugs who were loyal to him in the January 6th criminals. I mean, there might be some people in there who were mistreated in some way if you go case by case, but that's not what we had, a case by case study, but we had blanket pardons, including of people who were violent, right? And you have the use of the tariff power as a kind of cudgel against the economy. You have basically businesses being extorted around it. You have in Brendan Carr, who's the Republican equivalent of Khan, except I think worse because more effective. Somebody exercising the kinds of powers in the FCC that Rand and others had warned about in the 60s as being dictatorial powers, trying to, openly threatening broadcasting companies and advertising before the election that he was going to do that, right? This is real naked authoritarian moves. And that's before you even get to ICE. It's a real personal assertion of power with no pretense of anything else. And this is something that is not part of the politics of a free society and something that we haven't seen in America for a very long time. In the times when we saw something like it, and you can come up with real horror stories from our history, right? There was more plausible excuse. There was more reason to claim that we were in a special circumstance, and they were shorter lived and less global, I think. So I think we're in a really scary time, and we're in a place where the public needs to react to this, and we need to see what's going to happen over the next few years. Those of us who knew what this was 10 years ago said it at the time. There were people in the right who said it. There were people on the left who said it. There were people who were neither left or right, like objectivists, like myself and you, who were saying it for quite a long time, that this is what Trump is. This is what he represents. This is the antithesis of America. And it was regarded as hysterical. It was regarded as Islamophobic. Oh, I'm sorry, Trump deranged. That's the right version of what the left calls Islamophobic. It was regarded as deranged. By people who, if you told them the kinds of things that were regarded as deranged, were understatements relative to what's actually happened.
Yeah.
If you told people in 2016 that Trump would endorse what amounts to riots at the Capitol to stop his transition, away from his presidency, and then lie about it for years, people wouldn't have believed you. If you said that he'd pardon the people doing it, if you said that he would basically threaten to annex Greenland, nobody would have believed it, right? So these are the kinds of things, or have thugs on the street arresting citizens and demanding papers of people. We're well past the things that people viewed as paranoid. Things didn't come true. Every bad thing everybody imagined didn't come true in just the way they did. But we're in quite a dark place. And saying that we told you so doesn't really help. People don't want to hear that. And there's not much more one could say by way of, bold warnings and prophecies. What has to happen is people have to notice and accept where we are and that it's not where we want to be. And I think more and more people who aren't that political are just noticing something's wrong. It's affecting restaurants are closing. People are afraid. People I know are afraid. And I think we're going to see a mood in the country that is less outraged than horrifiedly bored and tired of what we're seeing. And hopefully that will start us moving in a new direction, but it's hard to know.
What is your evaluation of the demonstrations in Minneapolis? To what extent do they represent some Americans at least standing up and saying no?
It's hard to know from the level that I've been following them exactly what's going on and who's in them and what they're doing. There's certainly very few things in American history that warrant demonstration against as much as this does. This is, I think, clear, naked evil. ICE shouldn't exist in the first place, but if it does, it certainly has, there's no excuse for any governmental agency acting anything like how it's acting. And it's the kind of thing that needs to be protested, or deserves to be protested, that certainly needs to be filmed and documented. And I think I'm grateful for all the people who are doing that. What they're doing in protesting it's hard to tell because the narratives are mixed. I think there's nothing immoral about impeding ICE's operations, but whether it's prudent or not, whether it's a good strategy depends on what you're trying to do in doing it. And I think usually it's not prudent to try to impede the operations. I think documenting them is generally the right course. Maybe, making test cases and so forth. I've been heartened that there hasn't been much violence, as far as I can tell, in the protests. And I think that's an important and good sign. And when that's the case, it has to be because somebody is making it be the case. Mass protests are a disorderly thing and tend to break out in violence. And so these may yet, but insofar as they're not, it must be because they're being organized by people who are, having better messaging, but I haven't followed in detail who's doing it. I don't usually think street protests are the most effective thing, and I'm not sure that they are here, but certainly the documenting, I think, is important and noble and honorable work.
So what do you think is the way out, right? If there is a way out, how do we get out of the current situation?
I mean, it has to be through people rejecting Trumpism and rejecting what the right has become. But I think it's important that it's when these things get rejected, it's with a kind of bored annoyance and tack back to something better. There needs to be more than that to really get out of the trouble we're in. There need to be laws passed. There needs to be, Congress needs to act. I think to impeach Trump, ideally, and convict, but more importantly than that, to curb executive power generally, because it's not like whoever comes next, whether it's Vance or if the Speaker of the House gets in or after the next elections, is going to be, great news, right? To curb executive power, to make enforced by law some of the kinds of procedures that were merely norms prior. That kind of thing needs to happen. But before it can happen, I think we need a shift in the country that sort of takes the cultural power away from this movement, a kind of that is the MAGA movement, not a kind of shrill tone of moral panic over it, though there are things that are worth being panicked over. But this isn't who we are. I don't recognize my country. This isn't right. This is a kind of breaking of the spell. And I'm hoping we're seeing the beginning of that, but it's hard to know.
Do you worry that the backlash leads us into the hands of kind of an authoritarian left?
One has to worry about that. A backlash against the left has led us into the hands of this.
Yep.
But that's why I think the tiredness over it is part of what's important. The A kind of weariness of what we're seeing rather than a rage at it is what I think is going to be characteristic of a more healthy turn against this. And we'll see if that's what we get. If it's rage, if it's people throwing Molotov cocktails, if it's all the instincts of the, people thinking all the instincts of the worst people on the left were right and this vindicates it. Yeah, then we're going to have Ilya Omar or something doing the equivalent things. Or someone, I don't know who else, but some
Yep.
hard leftist. It needs to not be about rage, but about remembering some of what was good about America, feeling like this isn't it. And that doesn't mean that we need, a fully explicit regrasp and recommitment to the philosophy of America. That's not possible on a mass scale right now. We can try to inject as much of that into any move in the positive direction as comes. But what's possible on a more mass scale is just a sense, this isn't who we are. This isn't what we want. This doesn't look like America. We've made a really wrong turn here. And the people who are raging about this and telling us otherwise, telling us this is what we want, or who are justifying some other horror in the same tone of voice as these ones were justified, seem to people as shrill, as weird, as not us. And that I am hopeful that we'll see that in the next months and years.
Good. I think a lot of people are starting to realize how bad things are, and whether they're learning the right lessons from this is hard to tell. But we will see, as you said, we'll see in the next few months.
And one of the questions is what politicians arise, how are they messaging? What are they offering as an alternative? One thing that I would really like to see that I haven't seen yet is some kind of contract with America, a la Newt Gingrich, not in the particulars of what he had, although there were some good things in his, but a bunch of people running for Congress who putting forward here's what we'd like to do.
Mhm.
And anybody can sign up for this. You could sign up for it if you're a Republican or a Democrat. It would presumably be the Democrats pushing it because they're the ones out of power. But it would be a thing for any candidate to say where they stand on. And it should have, some reach goals and some proximate ones. But they should all be around a theme of restoring rule of law, restoring due process, restoring just treatment of people, ending things like disappearing people, ending capricious executive authority, and a list of things like this. And I think that's possible for someone running for Congress to come up with and maybe to get people to sign on to. And I would be much more happy about where we are and about the prospects for the future if I saw something like that. I'm not in a position to come up with one. I think you'd need someone who has more, concrete political skills and knows what's passable. But I'm confident that something like that could be done.
Yeah, I mean the challenge Democrats have is the stress within their own party. There's probably a group of Democrats who would love to do something like that, but then it would be hard to get a sign off from Ilhan Omar or and the squad.
Right. And what I'd like is something that they wouldn't have to disagree with, except insofar as they want to be little tyrants themselves. But in other
Yeah.
words, it's not saying we're going to change the marginal tax rate or we're going to, it's not, it wouldn't be about the things that have traditionally separated Republicans and Democrats. It would be about specifically about things about executive authority and overreach. And so that if you're some kind of horrible leftist Democrat who doesn't want to appear like you want to be a dictator, you could at least say you're okay with it and we'll get to our other priorities later. And if you're a moderate, you can, say this is really what I'm all about. And if you're a Republican, you're going to be forced to say, I'm against this and then say why, or no, I'm okay with this too. Whether the Democrats propose it or we propose it, I would support it. And that's the when if that emerges, I'll then be very hopeful about where we are politically.
Yes, that would be amazing. Good. So maybe a little bit, we can talk a little bit, then we'll go to the questions about, in the sense of how we got here, maybe here's a bit bigger sweep of history a little bit. How did we get to this position where the American people let this happen, or in some cases embraced this?
I mean, there's been a hollowing out of respect for our institutions and the people who are seen as elites, as knowledgeable, as experts, who often deserve it. Like they have not served us well, right?
Yep.
And you can think about some of the things that contributed to this, proximately the pandemic and just distrust of the government's reaction to the pandemic. Mostly, I might add, misplaced distrust. Like a lot of government officials deserve distrust, but it's not like, the right was good on this and the left was bad on this. Everybody was pretty much bad on it. And the few people who were good, Kemp in Georgia and a few other people in government aren't getting, not Kemp, what's his name, the governor of Georgia? Whatever, the governor of Georgia who was good on this, are not getting disproportionate credit, but it's felt as I can't trust the people in charge, right? And it goes back to the reaction to 9/11, the being told, I think, I mean, leftists tend to use this term gaslit, right? You feel like you're being made crazy. But I think much of the population, and particularly the non-left leaning population, felt gaslit by being told, Islam's a religion of peace. There's nothing to see here, after 9/11, and being told all kinds of things that they just sensed were not true. And when you have the sense that you're being lied to, that the people you're supposed to trust, you can't, and that there are certain things you can't say, and particularly when you accept that you can't say them, they tend to take in your mind the least refined form. They tend to kind of gel into a kind of resentment. And I think there was just a resentment that's inarticulate, that's rage. And I think there was a lot of that that's found expression in the MAGA movement. There was a poster that I think is eloquent to what drives this movement that I saw once that said, they don't hate him, they hate you. It was a picture of Trump. And I think a lot of people who feel disrespected, who feel they got the short end of the stick, who feel like their values are not recognized by American culture or the elites, see Donald Trump as in effect their avenger, and they see themselves as needing an avenger, right? They want to lash out, they want to destroy, and he's a blunt instrument that can do that. And when people are feeling and thinking that way, when they're scared and when they're angry, that is when people are susceptible to nihilistic movements. And I think the MAGA movement is essentially a nihilistic movement. I think it's in its spirit, like the worst of the Black Lives Matter movement. There's a better side of the Black Lives Matter movement, the ones that are fighting for, cameras on people and so forth. But the let's burn down our neighborhoods side of it. Or like to pick a more ugly example, Hamas or the Palestinian movement generally. Movements like this, nihilistic rage movements, arise when there are people who have grievances, and the grievances are sometimes legitimate, sometimes they're illegitimate, often they're a mix, but like they feel like they're mistreated. Their lives leave something to be desired, and they don't know how to understand it. But there's a growing and festering resentment, and they don't know what would solve the problem, but they have a sense of who represents it, and they want to destroy or tear that thing down. And there's been, grievance entrepreneurs on the left for decades and decades, turning everybody who is badly off into a kind of mascot for nihilism, whether they're Palestinian people or trans people or Black people. And, like if you want to, these people have it badly off, and so we need to burn the system down. And Trump is the kind of similar, well, Bannon and these kind of people, but Trump's the kind of nexus for that grievance entrepreneurship on the right. We have to tear down the system. We have to drain the swamp. We have to tear down the deep state. no views of what will be built in its place, but lots of things to say about who's to blame for the ill-defined sense of unease and disrespect everybody has. And, there are lots of things that people are right to feel uneasy and disrespected about. The way in which the trans issue was handled in the national conversation for a long time, where if you don't believe some state of things that changes every few months, you don't, you to that line without any kind of questions about it, you're suddenly a retrograde bigot, right? Um, and there's so little, respect for what it would be like for people's minds, assuming even that the ultimate view of the trans advocates were right, like what it would be like for someone to change their mind to that, and over what time they could change it. No, you're using your pronouns wrong. You've dead named uh, uh, Page. I forget which one's what direction the switch went to, but you dead named that actor or so forth when you're talking about a film from 10 years ago. You're some kind of horror show, right? That whole mentality um, is a kind of thing that people can't help but feel enraged and disrespected about. And it's a kind of uh, it is itself a kind of nihilistic movement on the left, right? That then engenders this kind of nihilistic response on the right, and then we can imagine the nihilism on the left arising, becoming stronger on the basis of that, and you get this kind of ping pong to hell. What I'm
Yeah.
hoping is that people are getting tired of that and getting a kind of weariness of hysteria, and therefore treating things that are actually as bad as people have a right to be hysterical about, but treating them as just, wow, this is a wrong turn. I don't want to be here. This isn't my America. And that's the reaction I'm hoping for. I'm seeing little signs of it, but we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. How do you think the Tea Party morphed into kind of the MAGA movement? Do you see any relationship there? I mean, Tea Party was angry.
It was angry. They didn't have much that they were for. It didn't morph directly into the MAGA movement, right? It became, um, well, more religious first.
Hmm.
I didn't really chart the steps. I remember when I went to one or two Tea Party rallies. I was very unimpressed by them. There wasn't much going on there intellectually.
Yeah.
And as you've pointed out, the people were old. Um, there wasn't much fire to them about anything positive. There was just kind of a general sense of aggrievement. But I didn't really know, I didn't expect that much of it from it. The thing that gave me a sense that we'd really made a wrong turn somehow was, I think it was in 2010, at some point, Obama was doing the State of the Union, and somebody yelled out, "You lie." That had never happened at the State of the Union. Somebody in one of the congressmen
Yeah.
lying, calling out and breaking the decorum and so forth. And what
Yeah.
was it about? Like the speech was full of lies. There was lots wrong in that speech.
As all of
That
them are. Right.
Right. That if you were going to make this claim, there were plenty of things to make it about. But it was about some issue about what benefits would be available to illegal immigrants.
Hmm.
So it was clear that that issue was animating, or at least this congressman, I forget who it was, thought it would animate. It was a Tea Party guy.
Joe Wilson.
Thought
Yeah.
it would animate his base in a way that nothing else would. That he wanted to make this move for, and that struck me as now we're someplace different. Because anti-immigrationism had been more a move of the left than the right at one point, not
Hmm.
even into the too distant past. It's not like the leftists were pro-immigration or pro-illegal immigration. If anything, the right was more, the business elements of the right were the ones who were more for tolerating it, and it should have been tolerated. It was part of what the economy was running on, right? Um, and but this became the central plank, and I'd known that there was a lot of anti-immigration sentiment in California. There were the Minutemen, there were these other kinds of groups, but on the right. But this should become central. This was the thing the person was going to call out at in the State of the Union, amongst all the other things that people had every reason to object to Obama doing. Made me think, oh, this has coalesced around something different. And it took a while for that to come to totally run the party. You can remember in 2012, um, The Republicans didn't know what they were running on. Donald Trump did a kind of trial balloon to run then, and that was the first time I heard him really stressing the kind of anti-immigration message, as well as the anti-trade sentiment that he'd always had been a part of his troglodyte thinking. Um, but it didn't quite, capture the whole. And even in 2016, if you look at what everybody was running on in the Republican Party prior to Trump taking all the oxygen out of the room, they were trying to run on entitlement reform and things like this. But the however it happened, the base had shifted. What they wanted had shifted. Trump was the one who knew where it was, knew what it had shifted to, and so he won and dominated. And exactly the steps by which that transition occurred and when it occurred and in what circles it occurred first, I don't know. It's something for historians to work out.
Yeah. All right. So do you see any figures in American politics today that might be suggestive of a more positive direction?
Not in terms of politicians that I haven't been following, political leaders closely. Nobody with a huge national platform stands out. A few smaller time politicians here and there look more promising, but in a way, that's good. If you think about the last move to the good in American politics, there weren't charismatic figures supporting it. There was a kind of tired backlash against something evil. So if you think about the last good, huge election in America, last landslide for the good, it was the 1972 election in which McGovern was defeated by Nixon in a context in which nobody liked Nixon.
Yep.
He was, and Nixon didn't have some inspiring agenda of anti-McGovernness that they were on about, and nobody regarded Nixon as our champion. They were just like McGovern and the hippies and the kind of egalitarianism which he's preaching. We don't want that. We want kind of normalcy. And Nixon, and the status quo represented that kind of normalcy. Um, and Nixon, was pushed out of office for he had, cheated. I mean, he had not cheated. He had, Watergate was a proper scandal. He was properly would have been impeached and resigned before he got impeached. And under Ford, somewhat, I think, even under Nixon, but we started getting some deregulation, and it really picked up under Carter. Carter's platform was Me Tooing, Ford in the election on we need to deregulate, we need to the excesses, and you got that all the way through Reagan, Bush, and Clinton. There were bad things that happened in their administrations too, but a kind of openness to trade, a kind of general pro-capitalism that allowed Silicon Valley to take off by taking some of the regulatory fetters off of them. And yet it wasn't what most of these people were campaigning and running on. It was for Reagan, but Reagan wasn't the one that did most of this work. He did some of it. But his real historical legacy is tying it to religion. But the deregulatory moment, the move against the kind of aggressive authoritarianism that of the new left was happening, aggressive state control of the economy, rather. That was kind of a new left platform, but was also part of the older left and was also being implemented under Nixon, right? All of that was happening prior to Reagan and across both political parties. And what I think we need to see, and now what we see is a kind of more intervention in the economy and more federal control happening across the parties too. So we need that tide to shift. And I think it has to shift without a charismatic leader, just with a kind of weariness about this and a change of opinion on the issues. And a lot of people, leaders kind of Me Tooing on the issues. Saying, oh no, we're not really. I mean, we don't really want a Green New Deal, and we don't really want these kind of immigration tariffs. And everybody kind of playing moderate around what it seems like the population wants and what the population wants having shifted and people running away from their worst positions. And I think if we get that, that's what the beginning of positive change looks like. And then you get, a year or two later, politicians casting themselves as the champions of that move. And that's when it becomes more dangerous because that's when they're going to have to conceptualize it more and say what they're for. And hopefully we'll be able to infuse better ideas to make it for something good. But I think what we want now is just a move back from the brink.
Mhm. All right, good. On that positive note, let's go to some of our super chat questions. We got quite a few of them. And you can keep them coming, guys. So let's start with a $50 ones. Okay, Shazbot. He says, does a person who needs a ladder in his library have an above average love of books? What kind of books do you put on the top section?
Well, part of the ladder is my wife's always thought it would be really cool to have a library with a ladder. But what kind of books are on the top section? Um, There are two sections higher than what you could see, but they're mostly history of philosophy books running. That is not books about the history of philosophy, but historical philosophical figures that aren't ones that I much study. So the ones I study more, Plato and Aristotle, are a little lower, but uh, pre-Plato and Aristotle Greeks at the left, going through early moderns, Hume, Kant, some Hegel up there. So that's pretty high. And then there are on the very highest are like reference books and extra copies of things. So, a bunch of copies of Atlas Shrugged besides the ones I normally use.
Good. Thank you, Shazbot. Always with a bit of humor to add to his questions. All right, Jackson asks, my son turns 2 this month. I purchased Discovery of a Child and am exploring educational options. Why is Montessori popular among objectivists? Are there other models I should research? Do you have any dad tips for building skills at home?
Okay, so your son is 2, he said.
Yeah, 2.
Um, Biographically or bibliographically, Montessori is popular among objectivists because there might be other reasons, but Ayn Rand commented positively on her, and so a bunch of people discover her through a bunch of objectivists discover her through the stuff about the Montessori method that was written in Ayn Rand's periodicals, and then through other people who discovered her through that. But um, there's a reason why she commented positively on her, which is Montessori is really how to put this. There's a strain of pro-human Enlightenment thinking. Human beings are capable. Human beings are good. We can produce things. Material work is like working to build things is good. People who do it are good. Like think of it as the antithesis of environmentalism, but where production and creation is bad. But that, along with the valorizing of reason, valorizing of productive work, it's a kind of spirit of the best of the 19th century. And Montessori is the person who the most has that attitude in education, paired with ideas about how to implement it, and a method that I've found, in seeing it be used with my son in his schools and trying to implement it at home, very effective. I think there's more to be figured out, but it's the kind of pro-human, pro-progress in 19th century Enlightenment spirit. Incidentally, that's a spirit that's much broader than the political faction. Montessori was, well, at one point a socialist, but in any case, not great politically, but had this spirit of that was prevalent at that time that society has lost of, you know, pro-humanism, pro-human progress, pro-technology, and especially pro the mind and real respect for reason. And I think and that's an attribute of the individual that you're kind of developing and helping flourish in every individual person. There's just a lot of wisdom in Montessori, and a good Montessori school is a great start. The best, I think, thinker on education these days is my friend and neighbor Matt Bateman, who's a Montessorian, and you can look him up. He's on X all the time with takes on education, and you can learn a lot from him about what else is going on in the education space. And if you look at the various things he's written over the years, get some more tips that I can give you directly about how to find good schools, where to find good schools, what to look for in a school, and what to do at home. I'll mention, Yaron, you've had a couple of shows on this with some people I really respect on this. I think Rebecca Gurn was on once, maybe with Gina, at the same time talking about parenting. And these are some of the people in my network who I talk to this a lot about, talk to a lot about these things, and where I'm learning from, or we're learning together how to raise our kids.
Any dad tips for building skills at home?
Um, hmm. Spend a lot of time talking to your kid. It's fun. It's
Yeah.
interesting. Different children are different, and I don't know, I've only had one. He's 6 now, and there's so much. This worked for me with my son, but who knows what? I don't feel like I'm in any kind of expert position, but try to explain things. Try to be genuinely like with him in what he's interested in, and kind of like working with and interacting with him on what he's doing. And you know, um, there's that. Let them be frustrated. I think that's a kind of non-obvious tip, but one thing that I learned early on that I think has been really valuable is let them try and fail at things. Don't rush in to help them. If they're crying and screaming for help, eventually you do, but let them sit with the frustration and work out a solution. And that's how you build persistence and independence. And often they want to do things like, it's one thing if they're asking for help, but often parents rush in and, do the job for them before they've given up. And whenever there's time to let them work and struggle on their own, do it. Learn to get a sense of when your child is concentrating on something, trying to figure something out, and really respect that and make time for it and kind of police around that space so that things don't interrupt. Obviously, sometimes things have to interrupt, but if they're trying to put together a puzzle or learn something, let them respect that that's like a part of the work of being a kid, and there's a kind of sacredness to that space.
Great advice. All right, molten splendor. All right, why is the culture accepting or responding with less outrage to acts of fraud by politicians, where previously these types of offenses were kept under the table, hidden, and clearly viewed as being wrong by the public as well as the perpetrators?
Well, on what scale are they reacting less to it? I mean, if you're talking about Trump doing it,
Yep.
there's a you can only be so outraged. If you think about, I don't know how many people know about audio, but like, there's a if the gain is set at a certain place, the channel can only hold so much volume. So if you scream at 10 and the thing is maxed out, you go up to 20 or 30 or 40 or 50, you can't get any more upset than that. Sorry, you can't get any louder than that. It just doesn't register. And I think on the left-leaning side, the gain was set way too high for things that weren't bad or weren't what they said they were. Like, everything was called racism when it wasn't, and Mitt Romney was a racist and so forth. So the shouts of racism and the shouts of other things, like about Trump just didn't register. Like it was people were maxed out and tuned it out. And then the cries of corruption, like people noticed the corruption the first time around. A lot of people did. Some people were deaf to their warnings because they had given up paying attention to anything that was coded to them as left, and the warnings were more often than not coming from people who were coded as left, although not exclusively. Other people did hear them, but thought, well, it's worth it to get Roe overturned or to get this regulation overturned or whatever thing they thought was worth making that deal for. And then they were defensive about it. And so started tuning out more and more of the noise and warnings to the contrary. But at this point, anyone who's willing to know how corrupt the administration is, anyone who's the least bit interested in it knows it. And nothing more that can happen can be worse in this regard than what's already happening. So, I mean, on the levels of corruption, we're at a kind of maximum. So it's sort of just boring and old news. And you can only be so upset so much of the time about it. I think people are just maxed out. And I'm hoping what'll happen is they'll just, that maxed outness will not mean that they forget about it, but that they react to it in bored, contemptuous disgust. The question is, what comes of that? Do they accept it as, well, this is just how it has to be. This is how governments are. This is how countries always are. And so this kind of corruption is just what you live with. And then that's the new normal. Or if there's a kind of disgust, contempt response that can we can do something about this. We can usher in a replacement for it. And again, I don't think that can be now or even should be this kind of loud self-righteous crusade. I don't think people will buy that. And but something like, let's have some laws about the president has to release his tax returns. Let's have some laws about what kind of donations he can and can't, or what his personal dealings and business dealings can be. Things that used to be that you would put your money in various trusts or whatever, that no one's doing anymore, or at least Trump's not doing, and the next president won't do if he can avoid it. Can we get a law requiring that? Can we get a movement to rein in corruption in just small, kind of obvious ways that signal that we're not accepting this as the new normal? That's the kind of thing that I'd like to see as part of a new contract with America.
Good. All right. Let's see. Justin, is-ought dichotomy well represented by the Plato philosophical divergence?
No, I don't think so. I mean, both of them would be put on the side of. So is-ought dichotomy, that term comes from Hume. The idea is that there's a category of statements that are about what is, and there's a whole nother category of statements about what ought to be, and reason is competent to judge what is, but what ought to be is just a matter of, in effect, certain kinds of emotions. And other people think, well, it's not emotions, but it's something else. But it's the idea that there's a whole different faculty for knowing what ought to be than what is, or the source of ought claims is wholly different from the source of is claims. And neither Plato nor Aristotle thought that, nor were they thought to think it by Hume. They're in the, by Hume's light, they would both be people who were confused about this and passed illicitly from is to ought. And by the lights of people who challenged the is-ought distinction, they were seeing things Hume didn't. So I think this doesn't map to Plato versus Aristotle, at least not in any kind of neat way. You can engineer a way to map it, but it's not how philosophers typically understand it, and I don't think it would be that clarifying.
Jennifer, Greg, been loving the music videos with your son. He has such an amazing musical aptitude for being so young. It is wonderful to see.
Oh, thanks. So that's advertising something I don't know if I want to in public. When Alan was just born, Alan Godhelf, who we mentioned before in connection with this book, buy it now on Amazon, but also was the name of my son, not coincidentally. When he was just born, he was born in 2019, and it was the pandemic, and I was at home, and it was the time of Facebook, and I was posting a lot of just me playing music, with him crawling around on the floor, just as a way to feel less lonely and have some connection to people when we were all stuck in our houses. And recently he's become a musician himself, and he's 6 now, and we've been playing a lot together, and there's tons of video of us playing. And so I've been thinking, what should I do with this? And I mean, mostly I'm just showing it to my friends and watching it myself, but I thought, is there a way to get some of that, social connection and fun, and maybe people will want to see it? And I thought Facebook was kind of dead, and it's just where people, the less prominent place where people get outraged about politics now. But I thought, well, what it's really good at is sharing things with your network of acquaintances. So I started putting up some of the videos of me and him playing, and people are liking them, and it's that's nice, and it's nice to feel social media being used for something positive. But I'm doing it on my private page, so it's not that private. I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of friends on it, but it's not the open internet, because I don't know if I want videos of. I don't know if he'll want, when he's an adult, videos of him playing piano at 6 all over the world. So.
Yeah, it is an interesting world in which we live. Everything is documented. Like if I want a picture of me as a kid, I don't know, there's a handful of them, right?
Same.
And now even my kids, there were hundreds of them, And now for every child, there are hundreds of thousands of them. And it's and so many of them are now public because they go on social media.
Yeah, I try not to be that
That's good.
public. I mean, I'm not hiding, but
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
I think
No,
a
it's
bit about like what will he want when he's older and who will he want to have seen what. And I
good.
don't like to put things with totally open sharing settings on them.
Yep.
Although he wants to release an album. How do I release an album? How do I get music out there? How do I do this? And so I might be persuaded by him to put stuff out more broadly at some point. But so far, I've been kind of stalling him. Well, we have enough songs. Maybe later
Yeah. Yeah.
we'll find a record company or whatever.
All right. Michael, is Trump engaging in deregulation so the economy can still grow even with the tariffs? He wants the power he gets from tariffs without the economic decline.
Well, it's not real deregulation when it's done within the executive branch and can be undone instantly by the next president. So I don't really think the thing to call what Trump is doing and did in the first term deregulation. What it is holding some of your whips a little less tightly. Um, Deregulation is, if you take the metaphor to slavery, emancipating slaves. And again, it's a metaphor. Slavery is, a more holistic and pervasive evil, but to stick with the metaphor, the kind of laxness about regulations is just, being a nicer overseer. And being a nicer overseer only to certain people in certain segments of the economy. And I think that's how we should understand what the administration is doing. I think it's also why it's very strange to imagine, as I know some people do, that this administration is really good for some even sectors of the economy, which I don't think is true. They'll do a bit better right now than they would, certain businesses under the alternative regime. But when we're thinking about how a sector of the economy develops, we have to think about what's happening to it long term. And if what's happening is they're regulated a little bit more generously right now under this regime, but not under, it's not a real change. The changes are the things that persist across regimes because either they are legislatively enacted, or though they're not legislatively enacted, there's a kind of broad cultural move in a certain direction that then leads to that direction, that area being handled in a way that transcends administrations, more leniently. And I think we are in a place, in part thanks to the work of people like Alex Epstein, and in thanks just to other developments that happened in the economy and how these things converged, where the real kind of aggressive environmentalism is on the back foot. And I think it would be on the back foot in a Democratic administration or a Republican administration, and I suspect will be in the next administration, whoever it is. So I think what's happening is right now we're getting a more favorable regulatory environment for energy companies and for some other companies than we would under a Democrat. But the main change that has happened, you could see already with Kamala Harris in the election, running away from all the anti-fossil fuel things she had said earlier, and with the Biden administration itself laxing some of the, as it went on, some of the worst things it did earlier on. And I think we would see a movement against the worst, change away from the worst excesses of environmental regulation happening whatever party's in power. And, probably each time it's a Republican, it'll be a little better than each time it's a Democrat, it'll be a little worse, but with the mean having shifted. And I think the real thing we're seeing that's helping the economy and energy is not the difference between one Republican regime and one Democrat regime, but the difference in the general mood that people have recognized that we need a lot of electricity for AI, and the kind of systems we had were not giving it. And so we need to relax on the things that were denying us power. And I think once that change came, we'll see versions of it in from the left and from the right.
And I think some of the predictions that the climate change people were making were so obviously wrong. Like when Greta said we've got 7 years to live or whatever, and a whole generation grew up on that, and here it is 10 years later and we're still doing fine.
Yeah, and there's I saw some graphic. The Great Climb Down has begun. And I think that's right. You see people kind of backing away from their most excessive kind of predictions, and it was something that was happening. You also see it. With nobody ever acknowledging that they're the culprits. But I remember some years ago now seeing, like 2 or 3 years ago, seeing a piece by Ezra Klein talking about how it's bizarre that and bad that people are so alarmed about climate change that they're, not having kids and not they're just fatalistic and think the world's going to end. And even if things go as bad as he thinks they're going to go, it's a matter of GDP will be down a little bit, not that the sky will fall. And I thought, yeah, when other people say that, you get very upset. And there's no crediting of, Alex or of with an M, rational optimist, who's anyway, there's no crediting of any of the so-called lukewarmers who have said this kind of thing in the past, but you're basically kind of adopting a kind of moderated version of their position. And if you're seeing that from people who are, straightforwardly progressive, you know that uh, the sane view here is winning, and the people who are most responsible for it are maybe not getting the credit they deserve. But there's been a lot of progress.
Matt Ridley, I think.
Matt Ridley, that's what I was looking for.
Adam says.
Yaron Longberg also.
Yeah. Texas theocracy started with anti-abortion laws. Greg, your take on where theocracy is likely to go next? For example, school and media regulations to block teens from ideas that differ from the ideas of their parents, maybe?
Well, right now, it's not. What's on the ascendancy in the country right now is not theocracy. It's broader and dumber than that. It's a kind of thugocracy, right? It's a kind of default state of strongman rule. And it's not the kind of things that you're seeing the most aggressive action on are not the priorities of the religious right, but the thin-skinnedness of this particular president. And what I'm hopeful that we'll see is a kind of pushback against that, against anybody having that kind of power for any agenda that will protect us from the religionists and the all the various people who want to shut us up. If we don't, then we're going to see it. We're going to see that power taken over by whoever next wields political power. And if it's someone from the right, yeah, you'll expect more and more religionist propaganda to be enforced. If it's from the left, you'll expect more environmentalist and pro whatever group is their current mascots for nihilism propaganda. And what we'll likely see is a shuttling back and forth between the two. Hopefully, enough people will be bothered by that and bothered by the idea that you can't say certain things at certain times, that that a kind of greater respect for freedom of speech will be restored.
Andrew asks, what is the essence of the epistemological difference between Aristotle and Rand?
If you want it in more technical terms, Aristotle is still a kind of light or passive intrinsicist about knowledge. He thinks that more things are metaphysical and read off from reality than Rand does. Rand thinks that universals in particular are creations of the mind based on facts. Aristotle doesn't quite think that. He thinks something nearer to it than what he's often given credit for, but he still basically thinks that there are something you might call universal objects. He thinks that there's a kind of fixed structure to scientific knowledge that we're working towards and will eventually get, and doesn't appreciate the kind of the full range of activity that the mind is involved in. and the scale of the work of knowing. I know that's very abstract, but it's kind of harder to be accurate and more detailed without being very long. Um, but a place to really look on this is my chapter on the objectivist epistemology in a companion to Ayn Rand. Probably has the most on this comparison. Um, and also, since I plugged the two philosophers, the latest in our Ayn Rand Society Philosophical Studies series, there were pieces in, well, there's a piece in here by Alan Godhelf on Rand's theory of concepts that would be useful, but especially also in the second volume of that series, Concepts and Their Role in Knowledge. If you look at Alan Godhelf's piece in there and my first piece in there, you'll get a lot on this.
Great. Solano. What would the state of the world be today if Aristotle had been as influential as Plato became?
I'm not sure what that would mean because in some sense Aristotle was hyper influential in the late Renaissance. He was, in towards the end of the Middle Ages, he was the most influential philosopher, the most widely read philosopher, seen as synonymous with philosophy. And I think that has a lot to do with why we eventually got a Renaissance and an Enlightenment.
Yep.
And so in that sense, he had his day and we're still benefiting from it. So do you mean like at what point should he have been more influential back, 1,000 years earlier? Maybe we wouldn't have had a Dark Ages. But I don't know how to answer that.
At the time of his death, or who was the more influential philosopher at the time, in the 100 years after he died?
I don't really know. In the 100 years after he died, we're entering the Hellenistic period, and Aristotle and Plato are both, both still influential figures, but the people who are really um, the hot shots are the kind of Stoics and to a lesser extent the Epicureans.
Hmm.
And so I don't know. I don't know where in the history of thought we have to think about where his star should have risen. But if what it, I think it's there's this objectivist take on history that it's a battle between Plato and Aristotle, a duel, I think is how, I forget if it's Leonard first or Ayn Rand first to put it that way. Leonard Peikoff has that as a title of an epilogue to
Yep.
OPAR, Objectivism and the Philosophy of Ayn Rand. And there's something really true about that. But there's a way in which you could take it, and it's not the way in which it was meant, where these two people did what they did way back when, and sort of one thing is winning out or the other thing is winning out, which view is prevailing, as though it's like two static worldviews, the Platonist worldview and the Aristotelian worldview, and they're vying for dominance. But at least with the true worldview, with the more Aristotelian one, it's not like something that can be accepted and then it's just there doing its work for us. It's a way of using your mind that has to be progressive. You have to be using it to discover new things. As soon as it hardens into we're all reading Aristotle's books and we're the Aristotle fan club, in effect, as opposed to people who are trying to think along these lines for ourselves, you don't have it anymore, right? You don't have this orientation towards reason, living your life by reason, directing your life by reason, discovering new things, correcting any errors that there might be, and so forth and so on. And so if you want to think about what an Aristotelian culture looks like in the sense of what's essential to Aristotle, what's right about Aristotle, what's really using your mind to understand and navigate the world and discover deep truths, that view, then it doesn't look like a period where people are seeing themselves as Aristotle students necessarily and reading his books. It looks like the Enlightenment. It looks like the Renaissance. It looks like in industry the 19th century, where his influence had receded from the philosophical scene. But and when I say it looks like the 19th century, like the Enlightenment, it looks like the Renaissance. What's going on? We're getting
we had an echo there. Sorry, I killed it.
It looks like many things that he probably would have disapproved of, because one of the things that I talk about in my chapter on him on Rand and Aristotle's ethics in here, is Aristotle was not pro-industry. He was not pro-middle class. He wasn't pro-investment. He wasn't pro-work, right? In the sense of productive work. He saw these things as small and lesser, but it's the true Aristotelianism in practice, Aristotelianism in the sense in which it's the opposite of Plato and in which it's the thing that's dominating the world in the world's best moments, isn't a static orientation and a following all of Aristotle's ideas, but a kind of approach to life that in some cases leads away from what Aristotle himself thought it would have. And so it looks like the best periods in mankind's history. And if you project those periods continuing indefinitely, if you project the ascent of humankind without the stumbles backwards, that's what that spirit fully unleashed looks like. But at this point, I think it's at this point in history, only in a very abstract way do you call it Aristotelian. I think you have to call it Enlightenment and now Objectivist, because to be reinvigorated, it's going to need Ayn Rand's insights.
Yep. Lucinda asks, any advice on how to choose, how to divide time and effort between one's central productive pursuits and things like hobbies? To what extent is how you divide optional? What things to look at to make optimal choices like that?
Um, hmm. It somewhat depends on where you are in life, right? The Lucinda, I believe, is a young person in school. If it's the same Lucinda that it's been on previous things that I've talked to, email with a little bit. And at that period, I think what you're looking for is I would think of it a little bit differently than hobbies in your main productive pursuit at that stage in life. I'd think of it as you're looking to develop a wide range of knowledge, interests, and abilities that you can integrate to serve your purposes. And you're looking, including your career, but and that you're looking to integrate the skills and abilities and knowledge that you have into pursuits. And I think those are the two things. It's not like it's written in stone. This thing is going to be my hobby, and this thing is going to be my job, and therefore I'm going to allocate my time proportionately to them. You want a job, you want a career path that incorporates as much of yourself as possible and integrates as much of your interests and enthusiasms as possible. But you also want to be stoking and kindling and developing new interests and abilities that can then be integrated into your developing career trajectory. And then some of them take their places as smaller and then as hobbies. And then decisions that are like tactical, in effect, about, how much time to spend on this and that are going to have to be made at a much finer grained level. If your finals are coming up and school's what you've identified as your priority, then maybe all of your time is spent on that and none of it on hobbies. And over the summer, maybe all of it on hobbies and hardly any of it on the, you have to just think about, do it with attention to your particular, where you are in life and how sure you are about what career you're headed towards.
All right, thanks, Lucinda. James says, Greg, if ICE demanded your papers, would you give it to them? Would you do it?
I don't usually have my papers on me. So I don't know how to do it. I mean, I would certainly try to get the encounter taped if I ever had an encounter with them. And I would use my judgment as to how likely I am to get killed or hurt. I certainly don't think it's sort of like if a mugger asked for my wallet, would I give it to them? If I could get away with not, I wouldn't. I would feel no obligation to give it to them, and it would just be a kind of prudential consideration, narrow prudential consideration about what I could accomplish by resisting or not resisting.
Yep. James says, any parenting advice for raising children under the coming fascist dictatorship?
Well, it's too early to say that we're going to have a fascist dictatorship. And if you were sure that that's what we were going to have and you had a way to get out of it, you should. So that's the first. And other than that, you have to think about what advice there is in general, which is to help your children learn to think for themselves, help them learn to form values, and to find pockets in which you could do that. And what do I mean by pockets? The whether we get a fascist dictatorship or not, the way education is handled in America is horrible, and pretty much in all over the world is horrible. It's institutionalized and doled out like the gruel in that movie Oliver, to everybody from the same little plate, same little dipper or whatever, without any thought for the individual child and what they need, unless you can get it by pleading, special exceptions because you have some kind of needs. It's really not good. And I would think about how I can find a way to educate my child in a non-government provided, non-institutional way. And I think that's something you really need to think about how to do, whatever happens to, like the best case scenarios short term for the government as well as the worst. This is something you need to find a way to do. And look for private schools that you think are good, or any kind of school you think is good. If private isn't necessarily good either, but look for ways to have influence, consider homeschooling. And I would just the thing I'm most concerned about is how to educate in that situation. That I think you can actually have effects over. I mean,
Yep. All right, not your average algorithm asks, many objectivist intellectuals tend to poo-poo the idea that we're collapsing into Nazism, but I think it's pretty clear we are. I'm not sure there's a question there, but where do you, I mean, I think you answered in the
Nazism
previous question.
is too specific.
Yeah.
Not everything bad, not everything authoritarian, not everything racist is Nazism. The default state of societies is xenophobic, autocratic, authoritarian, awful in all kinds of ways, but not specifically Nazi with a genocidal ideology. And most of the places that have descended into less and less freedom, it's not been the specifically, even among the like explicit fascists, like there's, Franco and there. So I think you can have too narrow a fixation on the Nazis because they're the most charismatic, grand scale form of that evil. And I don't think it's helpful to have this kind of, is it the Nazis or is it fine? It can be neither.
Yep.
And so I don't anticipate this country going down exactly the way that Germany did, but I think we have gotten significantly less free. There's much less, significantly less free speech, I think, in America now than there was 3 years ago.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people are afraid to say things. And I think the way the news gets covered is already colored by this. And I think people who are high up in businesses, like there are things that people were afraid to say during the end of the Biden administration, people in tech and so forth, that started to come out after Biden lost. I think there's a lot more of that now that we're not hearing, precisely because people are afraid to say it. And I think we'll learn about the reign of terror that a lot of people in different industries in different parts of the world, parts of the economy and so forth, are living under that we just don't hear now. And I think it's significantly different than it was under earlier, still bad phases of our government. But that's not the same as, and I think it's likely to get worse before it gets better. But I don't think it's likely to get worse in the specific way that Germany did.
Hopper Campbell, are you confident the Supreme Court will overturn the tariffs?
I'm no expert on the court. I think it's very likely that they will. But I don't think anybody can know for sure. I'm less concerned, I think, Yaron, than you are from things I've heard you say about their delaying it. I think it's the order in which they issue their decisions is people are always reading tea leaves to try to figure out what it is, and I don't think we know how they decide and so forth. And so there was some speculation that they never said, we're going to do this one
Yep.
early in the term. There was just some speculation that they would because it's important, and maybe they thought they would and have been delaying on it, or maybe they were never going to do it early. They have, some other. It turns out there are lots of things going on, and who writes them, and how many people have to write a dissent or a concurrence. So I don't think we know anything more than we knew during the oral argument, and it looked like they were going to rule against Trump on this, but we will see.
Papa Campbell, I don't think this country is ready for fascism. People will be shocked by how badly the Republicans will lose this November.
Um, I think there's a good chance that they will lose quite badly. There was a special election in the Texas State Senate that was a surprise to many people, and was a massive turn. My Texas suburb, which I'm pretty sure went for Trump in the last election, just had a special mayoral election, and a Democrat won handedly in it. Um, I didn't follow that election closely enough, and I don't know whether I didn't vote, and I don't know whether she's better or worse than her opponent. But in any case, I mean, we have a Ronald Reagan Boulevard running through town, so that
Yeah.
gives you some sense of the politics of the town, and this Democrat won. So it seems like there's a lot of momentum to the Democrats. Um, that's, I think, as bad as the Democrats often are, a hopeful sign, but we will see.
Mike asks, what is the objectivist view of the placebo effect?
I don't think it's a kind of thing there's an objectivist view per se about.
Yeah.
Ayn Rand didn't say anything about it, and it's not a topic in philosophy anyway, even if she had. It's I don't think there's anything in objectivism that is at all there's nothing that should make you particularly skeptical of that effect or think it's not real, or and I also don't think it is grist for any particular objectivist mill. It's just a fact out there.
It's more psychology and mind body, I guess. All right, NM. Right. Still trying to explain my question. It seems inconsistent to say we're at war, yet no vetting until war is declared is a referring of the response. Is a
This is
referring of
the
the
issue
response.
of, do we vet immigrants because we're at war? And this is the thing people are always bugging you about, right?
Yeah,
Um,
so he asked, I think, earlier today, and he's asked before about this. Other people asked me. And uh, my point is that there would be no, there'd be no legal basis to vet anybody unless you decided you're at war. So I know we're at war, therefore I think there should be vetting. But to make it legal, you have to have a reason to do it, right? Yeah, you have to be able to justify it. Go
I,
ahead, Greg. Yeah.
I think that's true. And you could, if you were in a situation where there was somebody who was in favor of some kind of vetting taking place, and we weren't at war and they weren't going to declare war, and you had to decide, do I go with the guy who wants to vet without declaring war, or with the guy who doesn't want to vet until we're at war? But this seems like fantasy scenario. There's no decisions being made about whether to vet people, and the people who are what you have is a group of people, a segment of the population who is terrified of people at Home Depot who want to, be hired to do construction work, and people working in kitchens and restaurants and so forth. And nothing that they're talking about has anything to do with vetting anybody. And the kind of crackdown that we're having on people who want to have a job is not helping vetting. It's, if anything, making it harder to vet immigrants. And so there's this kind of bizarre premise that uh, somehow running around Minneapolis and throwing people out and arresting people and disappearing them to jails and being concerned about the make-believe immigrant crime wave and so forth is somehow a step along the way to or part of or consistent with being concerned about terrorism. But it's not. You might as they don't have anything to do with each other except that the one depletes resources that could be used for the other.
Yep.
Let's get concerned about what people are actually plotting to do the country harm, what terrorist networks there are. Take all the resources that are being used to round up short order cooks and random people and disappear them to God knows where, and put those resources into actually researching terrorist networks. And if you want to say, okay, we shouldn't change some of the laws that are on the books about immigration because maybe it would tie our hands in doing that until we have some other situation, well, maybe we could argue about that, but stop enforcing them against people who are doing no wrong. It's like saying if we get rid of we stop the war on drugs, how are we going to end terrorism? Because maybe we can arrest some terrorist under some drug charge. Well, that's ridiculous. The war on drugs is distracting us from fighting terrorism. If you had the idea there's some one terrorist in jail on a drug conviction, let's not throw him out and let's keep the law until we find a better way to lock him up. I think that's wrong, but we can have that argument. But the idea that somehow prosecuting a war on drugs is a means to stop terrorism is crazy and it's dishonest. It's not what's happening. It's not what anybody who thinks about it thinks is what's happening. And it's the same thing with the war on short order cooks and people working in factories and field workers and all of these other people who are just people coming here to work and make your life better by trading with you. But some of you are afraid of trade, are afraid of freedom, are afraid of capitalism, and are afraid of people who speak with a different accent. So you're happy to have jackbooted thugs come and beat them up and beat up any American citizens who happen to be, in the way. This is not American. This is not freedom. This is not capitalism. And it's not any part of keeping us safer. Bad laws and following bad laws and enforcing bad laws rigorously does not keep people safe, and it does not uphold the rule of law. It undermines the rule of law. If we made an idea that we're going to, Trump now made it the case that you don't have to report your tips. But for decades and decades, people who were getting paid tips in cash weren't reporting them or were hardly reporting them. If we, instead of making Trump's change to, make tips not have to be, taxed, got a whole section of the IRS to find every illegal waitress who's not reporting her tips, and we made it a kind of moral crusade to find them and round them up and round up everybody who was collateral damage. That would not be enforcing the rule of law in the tax code. It would be introducing massive new injustices. A lot of how our legal system works is by the worst laws don't get enforced or don't get enforced too rigorously. If they were, we wouldn't be able to have any kind of a free country because we have enough bad laws on the books that the judicious non-enforcement of them is part of what keeps us free. It's a hamper to our being free in that it gives people discretion to selectively enforce them when they want to, but then there's a defense that it's being selectively enforced against you, and that is sometimes used in court, right? But it is no move towards the rule of law to enforce every bad law. And it's not, it doesn't keep us safe. It doesn't, it's all a fantasy. And I don't think it's that hard to see that it's a fantasy.
Yep, that's good. Should make that a independent clip. That was passionate and well said. All right, why do you think Barry Weiss pulled the 60-minute segment on abuse and torture at CCOT? Was it self-censorship for fear of retribution from Trump?
I don't know. So it did eventually air. It is my understanding. I mean, so it aired in Canada right away, and I don't know.
Yeah, it did eventually.
But it did eventually air. And from what I can tell, I didn't make it closely, but it aired without many differences. So she's taking over a large organization. It's hard to run a large organization. She hasn't done anything like this before. She's trying to change its direction among in the face of like a real oppositional culture to it. There are real reasons to suspect her of being certainly do not suspect. I think we know that she's way too soft on Trump and too soft on the Trump administration. And there's reasons to suspect her, as there's reasons to suspect everybody of being afraid of them right now. So you certainly can't, you certainly have to wonder if that was part of the motive. But I also don't want to kind of, I think th she deserves some benefit of the doubt in assessing it, particularly since it did air, and it aired without, changes that made it, complementary to the administration anyway. And there is a real need to win back there's a need to some of the kinds of media reforms that she says she wants, to win back, the confidence and trust of much of the nation. So we have to hope that she's serious about doing them and not that they're a kind of, excuse to pretend that Trump isn't what he is.
Yeah. I like numbers. Greg, you've said institutions are sometimes criticized too collectivistically. For example, failing to do X. So does that apply to blanket judgment of ICE?
I don't recall when I said that, what exactly he's thinking that I said about institutions. Did I say it here
I'm not sure either.
on this show? So I'm not sure what claim of mine you're talking about, but there are illegitimate institutions that should not exist. ICE is one of them. Often institutions that shouldn't exist, when they do exist and have existed for some time, develop features in them that mitigate some of their harm and damage. ICE has been greatly expanded recently, in the service of doing something that there's no reason to do. So I don't think there's anything positive to be said about it. It doesn't have kind of institutions that have been holding it in check. I think you could say that about the DHS. So the DHS shouldn't exist.
Yep.
It was created in the wake of 9/11, as a kind of reorganization of a bunch of agencies, some of which should exist and some of which shouldn't, but which have been now put under a new rubric that makes them all worse. But I don't know that I would say, end the DHS overnight. It's not clear to me that what, if anything, would be lost if we ended ICE overnight. But maybe some things, because there needs to be some, given the state of things, policing of the border, and they're the ones who are doing it. But certainly nothing would be lost by bringing it back to the state that it was in December of 2025.
I mean, the Border Patrol is in charge of the border. So ICE is actually responsible for inside the United States catching. So the Border Patrol
Yeah,
would
so it's
exist.
not clear that but like there's how far inside the border and so forth. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't see anything they're doing that's legitimate, but if there's
ICE
some.
didn't exist before the Department of Homeland Security was reorganized in 2002, I think it was.
Right. But then when that happens, some functions get put that, like it might be that if the lights turned out overnight, something that needs to get done isn't getting done. But if there is, I don't know what it is.
Liam, is Donald Trump worse than you ever imagined?
No, he's about what I thought he was.
Yep.
I think it's pretty clear what he was in 2015, for people who were willing to know and who understood something about the nature of irrationality. I think there are a lot of people who don't understand that much about irrationality, and there are a lot of people who weren't willing to know.
Yep. Roman, what is the scientific basis of free will?
I wonder about a statement like that. Are you asking, by scientific basis, do you mean on the basis of what science do we know that it's there? Or on the basis of what facts known to science cause it? I don't think we know that it's there by any science. I think we know that it's there by introspection and by philosophical reasoning that isolates certain facts of our experience and shows us their significance and their role in our thinking. And then there's a scientific question about, how it works and what causes it and so forth. So I think of it a bit like saying, what are the scientific basis for legs? I know I have legs because I could look down and see them. I'll back off and give them too. And then the question is, well, how do we have legs? And then you could answer various scientific questions about how legs got there and how they worked, including questions about their evolutionary origins and bone structure and so forth. And not being a scientist, I don't know all the answers to those questions. I think nobody knows the answers to all those questions with free will, though there's been some interesting research concerning it. We did an episode of the ARI podcast series, ARI Bookshelf, on a book by Kevin Mitchell called Free Agents, which is one of the better recent books exploring these issues. And so you could look to that episode and look to that book for some ideas about this. But there's just lots of unanswered questions. Now, the other thing that would come up under the idea of the scientific basis is how do you respond to the claims purportedly based on science that show that there can't be free will? But the answer is all of those claims predate by thousands of years the science they're allegedly based on. So they're not, in fact, scientific claims. They're claims based on mistakes about the metaphysics of causation that are then read into whatever science happens to be current at the time.
Clark, which is the biggest threat to public safety, the crimes of illegal aliens or the unaccountable paramilitary troops created to deport them?
Well, the latter, but the crimes of illegal aliens is not a valid concept. That's like the crimes of people with green eyes. Some people commit crimes and some of them have green eyes. There's not like some category of crimes by illegal aliens. Or, what if you can do this with any prejudice, like what's the greater safety violation, the bad driving of Asians or the Chinese Exclusion Act in the immigration laws from back when we had it. Bad driving is a threat to public safety. And if some Asians are bad drivers, so be it. But there's no particular reason to think Asians are any worse than anybody else. And even if they were, that would not be the way to, even if there were some higher incidence of bad driving, that would not be the right way to conceptualize it. There's no public safety threat in America from criminal illegal immigrants. There are criminals, and a few of them are illegal immigrants. So the whole conceptualization of it is wrong.
Wyatt asks, do you agree with objectivists on disobeying and harassing ICE?
What objectivists? Who? And what are they saying? I don't know. Everyone's saying the same thing. There's
Probably
no,
means me. Probably means me.
ICE has no moral claim to be followed any more than listened to any more than a mugger does. Whether you should therefore disobey them in any instance, I don't think they have any right to do what they're doing. But they also have guns. Now, whether you should harass them, I don't think much, if anything, is accomplished by harassing them, and it can lead to, I think that kind of protest tends to backfire and tends not to help. So just mere harassing, I think, is bad. Certainly kinds of things like what was done in that church where they disrupted a church service because one of the officiants or something was an ICE officer, that's wrong. So if that's what's meant by harassing ICE, but if what's meant is videotaping them and asking them questions while they're doing their immoral job, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yep.
And there's things good about that. And the question is sort of, is there some strategy in the people doing it analogous to the strategy of the best moments of the civil rights movement, where they're, working in they have some coherent agenda to bring this evil to greater public attention and challenge it. And if so, it's good. And where it's not that, it's bad. And it's a little unclear to me from the reporting what's going on in different instances of it.
Roman asks, self-conscious as in conscious of one's own self is in direct translation to German. In its direct translation to German is connoted positively in the German language. Why is it connoted negatively in the English language?
So the idea is I'm self-conscious, meaning I'm worried, bashful, concerned about how I appear,
I see.
etc. Too reserved, etc. Versus self-conscious in the sense of deliberate, aware of yourself, etc. I think there are just lots of accidents in how words come to be and get their connotations in different languages. There's a sense of self-conscious in English where it's positive, like Rand talks about axioms being self-evident in perception, but needing to be grasped consciously and then self-consciously, or self-conscious adherence to a principle or something. There are lots of cases where the word is used in a neutral or positive sense that I assume is similar to the sense in which it's used in German, where there are more technical uses. But then there so happens to be in English this word self-consciousness or self-conscious for being too acutely aware of and fixated on your how you're coming across in social situations and being kind of micromanaging your performance out of anxiety. And it's because we have the more technical usage of it that I gave in some philosophical passages is an unusual thing to have to talk about. And so the word is kind of free to come to have that other meaning. And that meaning was occupied by that word in English, which is a sensible enough word for it. Your mind is occupied with thinking about yourself in a situation where it's maybe not helpful for it to be so occupied. And therefore, that seemingly didn't happen in German. That word doesn't get used that way. And so the more technical and more unusual usage, I imagine there's more rein to. I'm curious sort of what words are used to describe the negative phenomenon that's called self-consciousness in English and German. But there are millions of these, languages differ from one another in these ways.
Cobb asks, is it good to see Rand Paul standing up to Trump?
I haven't seen that much of it. There were a few good things he's done. Likewise, Ted Cruz here and there has said positive things. So there are people who one might have thought were totally supine who have stood up a little bit and maybe are testing the waters for being candidates the next time there's a presidential primary. Nothing I want to kind of get up and cheer for, but better than nothing.
Edu Carrot. Any thoughts about the relevance of the Epstein story from a philosophical cultural view?
Not really. I mean, here's another one where it's a little hard to know what's going on. All of these documents have been dumped and papers are gradually sorting through them, and you're hearing different things each day, and there's not enough kind of distance to have processed them. I'm a little bit concerned about them having been released at all. Probably in the grand scheme of things, given everything that's gone on and all the public speculation and so forth, the right move was to release them. And so I'm not saying they shouldn't have been, but it's not a good thing. Like there are criminal investigations of people. They turn up all kinds of collateral stuff that's supposed to be private, that is not illegal, that's embarrassing to various people, that they haven't broken the law. And I don't think in general, findings of investigations that don't result in indictments should be made public. It's similar to the Steele dossier. That shouldn't have been made public. I mean, probably eventually it had to be because everybody knew about it and it was being whispered about, whatever. But like in a better political culture and a better world, raw intelligence, which people know contains lots of, like the people whose job it is to work with this intelligence and filter it and collect it and so forth, know that it contains lots of salacious rumors that aren't true and lots of things that are misleading and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a whole process of kind of sifting through it and finding something true and actionable. I suspect the same thing is true in criminal investigations. And so if it's released, people get, wrong, false, misleading impressions and so forth. And I suspect some of that is true here, but it had become so much of a political football, and in part because it seems like there had been a real cover-up of stuff earlier on at earlier stages in the investigation, that it's reasonable that people wanted it to be released. And but I hope people will be, responsible about sorting through it. I'm worried about witch hunts against people where something comes out that looks really bad and then we learn more about it and it turns out it was taken out of context or so forth. And I think I'm sure a lot of people did creepy things. I've seen some creepy emails from people that are disturbing and makes me think less of them, but I haven't been following it in great depth. And it seems like what we have is, so far as we could tell, a guy who was a creep, who was abusing minors, trafficking them, who a lot of people tolerated and were seduced into his lifestyle, but seemingly not, so far as we could tell yet, into those crimes, but overlooked them. And that's gross enough and terrible, but not what I think was advertised and what many people expected to find, which was, lists of people being blackmailed and cabals and so forth. And I don't really think there was ever much reason to think that that would be what we'd find when the files came out, but it certainly seems not to have been yet.
Hey, Lucinda, there's been many times where I've gotten in a slump, and listening to one of Greg's lectures made everything clear again. Helped me improve my mindset. Greg's work has greatly improved my approach to life over the years.
Well, that's very nice to hear, Lucinda.
Yeah.
I'm glad if my talks could do a bit of help in that way.
Thanks, Lucinda. Hookham. So is Heraclitus the original bad philosopher?
Um, I think that's overstating it. In part, we have these, Heraclitus wrote these kind of cryptic one-liners, or two-liners, I guess. And it's a little hard to tell what he was up to with them. He noticed some things that were true and significant, I think, that contraries are a lot more related to one another than people sometimes portray them as being. And I think that counts as new knowledge and as a step towards the positive. The worst things in him, it's not clear whether he thought them or they were read in by later people. He might have thought them, that knowledge is impossible and that nothing is what it is and so forth. But it's not clear to me that that was Heraclitus's own view as opposed to the views of some later followers of his and some people who um, were influenced in thinking that by the philosopher who's often seen as his antipode, Parmenides. So um, I think I think it's too harsh on Heraclitus, but there are certainly ideas in him that are bad or that could be taken in a way that makes them very bad and have been so taken.
All right, so Lone Dissenter says, Yaron fends off technical philosophy questions for weeks, telling us to wait for a philosopher. Here's Greg, and we're asking about Trump. Looking forward to someone asking tomorrow about Quinn's intermittency, something of
Quine's,
translation.
maybe Quine's indeterminacy of translation.
Yes, that's it.
Well, are you asking that? Who is this?
He's not asking it. He's just.
Yeah. If you're asking it, put some more money and ask about it yourself, and I'll say whatever.
That's what I was going to say, Lone Dissenter. If you're complaining about everybody else, you should ask a philosophy question. Come on. That's funny. Cobb.
I wonder if he has any questions or if he put it to Chat GPT, what's a technical philosophy topic, and that's what.
Yeah, I don't know. Because I do not know. I can't pronounce it. Never mind know what it is.
So Quine, Wilfred Norman Quine, Harvard philosopher, kind of
Yeah.
whatever, and indeterminacy of translation is so. But no one's paid to hear about that, so
Yeah.
we'll wait till
Yeah,
someone
exactly.
does.
They'd have to pay me a lot of money to hear about that one. Okay, Cobb says, why are tech billionaires bending the knee to the Trump administration? What's the point of being rich if you're still politically submissive?
Well, I think they're afraid.
Yeah.
I mean, some of them I think were afraid of Biden and were somewhat hopeful that they get something better under another regime. But I think part of the fear they were in made them afraid of both alternatives. And I don't consider this people who are acting freely. I think the people in big tech are um, under the gun right now in lots of ways. And by right now, I mean over the last, several years, right? There are lots of decisions being made that affect the industry is at a pivotal time. AI is coming up and so forth, and they are frightened. And the regime of light regulation of tech is now over, or threatens to be over under both parties. And I think these people are terrified. And they're terrified of the Democrats, they're terrified of the Republicans, and they're trying to suck up. And it's not, um, it would be nice to see somebody who could really stand up for themselves, but it would take a lot of courage. They have fiduciary responsibilities to their shareholders that make it very hard, might make it wrong for them to do it unless they really know what to say. And they don't know what to say.
Yep. Right. Sika, is true artificial intelligence possible in principle? Can machines develop intelligence and other relevant traits, even come to have rights?
Well, it depends on what you mean by artificial, right? So,
Or machine?
and machine, like there could be artificial life forms that are alive. Like suppose we make out of, well, just suppose we make out of the same kind of stuff we're made of, but it didn't evolve, some new animal. It's an artificial animal made in a lab, but it lives a life like an animal and everything else. And then suppose the artificially made animal is one with a brain enough like ours that it's intelligent and can think and talk and converse. Then it would just be another species. It would be the same as if we discovered another species of rational creature, and then it would be like us in some ways and unlike us in others, and we'd have to figure out just in what ways it's like and unlike, and what does that mean for our relation to it, and does it have rights? Presumably, the same thing could be true with an artificial life form that's not made of the same kinds of stuff we are. Maybe there could be a life form like that that's made of silicon and copper. I don't know whether there could or not. That's a science question. But there's nothing to rule that out. I think the kinds of things that we're calling artificial intelligence now, LLMs and so forth, are not conscious, are not lifelike enough. They're tools that really helpfully simulate some of what intelligent beings do and do it in a way that allows us to offload a lot of our mental work to them. And that's great and good and a really promising technology and suite of technologies, but I don't think it's the kind of thing that can make choices or have rights until it's a living thing that has its own interests. But whether something like that can develop out of current computers, for example, that's a kind of different question. We don't really know how it developed in the first living things.
Yeah, and we can't recreate it. We still haven't created life in the lab. All right, Lucinda actually wants to know what this Quine's
Quine.
intermediacy of translation thing is.
Quine's indeterminacy of
Quine.
translation.
God.
Ben wrote more on Quine, so he's Ben Bayer, maybe the person to ask. But so the idea is that what's the best way to put it? So if you think about you see somebody, it's how do we know what another language means if you're not already a speaker of the language? But then it's going to apply too to learning your own language or so forth. You see somebody point at something and say a word for it. Maybe you're a kind of, anthropologist or whatever, looking at some primitive tribe, and they point at something and say, Gavagai is Quine's example. And you're going to try to figure out what Gavagai means by looking at what they point at. And they're pointing at what you would call a rabbit. So you come to think that the word the word Gavagai means rabbit. But there were a million other things he could mean by Gavagai and by pointing at that. For example, he could be referring to the fur of the rabbit or the color of the rabbit or the hopping that the rabbit's doing. Or Quine's bizarre example is you could be referring to undetached rabbit parts. That is all the parts of a rabbit while they're still connected to the rabbit, but not the rabbit itself. And you can never know by seeing what things they call rabbit that they mean the same thing that you mean by rabbit. So there's sort of an indeterminacy to translation, no set of facts about in what situations which people say which words, will tell you for sure what the words means. And then this is supposed to have, various implications for how we can learn languages and what we're doing in learning languages and so forth, not all of which I feel competent to speak to. But that's what that issue names. It comes up in science fiction and so forth now and again. There are a couple of episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation where, without mentioning Quine, what's clearly the same idea is in play.
And Milton Splend asks, what has been the most difficult philosophical concept for you to grasp during your career?
That's hard because if I think about different times, like really understanding free will, uh, when there was a time when I was first learning philosophy, when I was like an undergrad, really getting my head around the role of free will in philosophical debates and what it meant and so forth. And that, in a way, was the biggest growth experience and learning experience. But that was like before I was doing more, that was like as an undergraduate. If I think about later in, when I'm in the midst of my career, the things that are experienced as most hard are understanding what other philosophers are on about, where I have a sense there's something wrong about it, but I'm not quite sure what it is, and then trying to figure out what's right about it. And so one of them that I'm thinking about now that I don't have a full answer to, but relates to the kind of some of the free will questions and what you might call the scientific basis for free will, is how to understand causal laws and what's right or wrong about the way causality is thought about since modernity, since the scientific revolution, and how it relates to the various ways that causality, to the ways Aristotelians thought about causality, which is definitely wrong in some respects, but in some other respects might be righter than the more recent philosophical analyses of it, and how to kind of put all those thoughts together. I have the sense there's something important that I haven't quite worked out about that yet, but I haven't worked it out. Related to that, the whether there's a kind of causation that's going on in math, and what's happening in things like Euclid's proofs that make some explanatory and others not. There's a whole host of questions around causation and explanation that I think there's a lot more to be figured out about than I figured out.
Let's see. All right, we're well into our third hour, so
Okay, well, I've got time.
you got time.
Try to
Good.
set a record if you do.
We're on a tropic. Do you think most non-objectivist philosophers you interact with are chronic evaders? Do you view them as evil? Do you find it difficult to be civil to them?
Most non-objectivist philosophers I interact with. I don't find it difficult to be civil with most of the ones I interact with, and the ones I find it difficult to be civil with, I don't interact with.
Don't interact with you.
I think most people evade quite a lot about certain categories of things. And I think there are whole categories of things that a little bit of evasion gets you a long way on. And I think most philosophers are in that category. So we'd have to go sort of a little bit more detailed about who we're talking about and on what topics. But I think most people's thinking about most people, whether they're philosophers or not, their thinking about philosophical issues is not entirely honest. It's a kind of gameplay about something that they ought to know is important. And so there's a real kind of dishonesty there, I think, for regular, ordinary people. But it's not what they make their career about. So, although it might be bad, it's not essential to them and their character. When you're talking about someone whose profession is being an intellectual, then when there's evasion involved in their work and in things central to their work, it makes it a lot worse. But part of the way most philosophers think about philosophy, which again is not good, involves seeing the thing they actually work on as this very small, delimited set of questions, and not taking a professional interest in the field more widely. And that's a bad thing about the way philosophy is currently practiced. But I think often people are less evasive about, or the better people about the particular issues they're on about. And so that makes them a little better.
Mhm.
But you have to judge in a more, judge people a little more individualistic. Like if you ask me about particular people, I don't know that I would say in public about each of them, but I have more developed judgments. And often you do and ought to look for where there are communities of values in dealing with people. And there might be over very narrow things, like what the hell does this sentence in Kant, which is really confusing, mean? And somebody who might be, bad about a lot of things and evasive about a lot of things might, for whatever reason, be really interested in getting at what this sentence means, and that might be helpful to me to know. So I tend to think in terms of what are the values that we're on about.
Cobb asks, what are your thoughts on the philosophy of Carl Schmitt? He is becoming popular on the dissident right.
From what I know about him, he's a Nazi.
Yep.
And what I know about like the friend-enemy distinction and so forth seems to me essentially to be irrationalist garbage, but I've not made any great study of it, and I don't, and I think that's also fine. Like at some point, if it's becoming important enough to and influencing people enough, I will look further into it. But I don't think it's nobody can read and study everything, and I think one has to. It's a fine and good thing to say from where I sit. There's no value here,
Mhm.
and so I'm not going closer until I have a reason to, and that's how I think about Schmitt.
Enric says, in the 1970s, Congress was much more in charge. Republicans were outraged at the Nixon administration. It looks to me that Reagan's belittling and attacking Congress led to its neutering.
Um, Congress is definitely less active now than it was in the past. I think there are a lot of causes of that over time. I don't know to what extent Reagan, you could hold Reagan responsible. He probably played some role, but I don't know that it was him in particular. Congress was pretty active and powerful in a way during the Clinton administration, right? And that was post-Reagan. So I don't know. I suspect that giving Reagan too much credit or blame.
Yep.
And Congress could take back its authority today if it wanted to and have the right incentives.
Definitely. Cobb says, thoughts on Josh Shapiro? He seems reasonable.
The governor of Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
he does from a distance. I mean, I haven't lived in Pennsylvania in a long time, and I only know what I see about him in the national news, and not that much. But yeah, of Democratic figures who have national aspirations, he seems better, and I'm more positively disposed towards him than, say, the governor of California or AOC or a bunch of other people.
Yeah. Lucinda says, I've been reading The Reopening of the Western Mind and am enjoying it. Any advice on how to better retain and sustain what I'm learning over time to keep my knowledge alive?
Um,
Question.
my main advice is don't worry about it too much. I think there's a big value in exposing yourself to a lot of information. And you can't hope to retain it all, but it leaves kind of traces. And if there's anything that's of particularly in books like The Closing and Reopening of the Western Mind, which I agree were both excellent books, or some other kind of big history books that I've thought were really valuable. Richie Robertson's book on the Enlightenment, another book like that I recommend reading if you haven't listened to it. I could mention a whole bunch of others in history.
Yeah.
But if you're not making this, either you're reading the book because you're making a special study for a particular purpose, in which case you take notes relevant to that purpose, or you're reading it for sort of general edification and growth of knowledge, in which case don't take notes, don't worry too much about remembering it. You're familiarizing yourself with a domain by reading it, and it will stick with you in the way that you need. Like you'll have a sense of, oh, I remember this topic from, I remember reading something about Spinoza and where might it have been, and maybe you won't remember, but you'll know which books you read that talked a little about Spinoza or whatever it is, and then you'll look it up later when you need it. And particularly now when so many books are available on hypertext and so forth after the fact, finding out where you found something that you remember, you can use an LM for it or whatever, it's pretty easy. So I don't think you have to worry. I don't think you ever had to, and I think now there's especially low benefit in worrying about retaining things. The main thing is to build familiarity with a range of material and just trust that it will stick with you in a form that will be make it useful that you've read it at some point, and then at the point where you need to delve into it, you can find it. But if there's something that a particular point that's particularly crucial to you to remember, write it down or highlight it. If the highlights in Kindle are particularly useful because then you could search them.
Bob, why does deviance seem common among successful men, judging by the Epstein circle?
Well, I don't think we know how much more common it is among successful men than unsuccessful men. Successful people are going to have more opportunities. Their lives are getting more pried into and put on public display. Um, so I don't know that we're in a position to say that they're more deviant than other people. There is a phenomenon of kind of, nerdy, successful guys who were not popular in high school and so forth, and now suddenly they have a lot of money and power, and they're vulnerable to certain kinds of temptations and predations. And I'm sure some of that happens, but I don't know. I mean, what are we really finding out from the Epstein files? A lot of people talk in disrespectful ways about women that are gross around a flashy, powerful seeming rich guy, and overlook his uh, crimes, or they might not even know he's committing crimes, but overlook preferences and fetishes they know about, which it turns out were being indulged in exploitative and criminal ways. And the fear of that might be the case should make you like put a wide swath around saying things like he likes them young, even younger than me, as our president said. Um, that seems to me like I doubt that blue collar guys are much better at that, and much more less prone to talk that way than some of these successful guys. Certainly, my experience has been that I've heard that kind of talk much more around less educated, less elite people than I have heard it around more elite circles. I've heard some of it in both, but much more in the less elevated, less privileged circles. So I don't know, maybe if you get to elite enough company, polarity reverses, but I'm skeptical that that's true. I think we're just, privy to the texts, the embarrassing texts and emails of a certain cadre of successful people, and not privy to the similar ones of the grossest unsuccessful people.
Molten splendor. Can you comment on why so many intellectuals seem to lack common sense? The ivory tower.
I mean, I'd want a better sense of what's being described as that. I mean, a lot of people lack common sense, and a lot of people, if what you mean by common sense is ability to deal rationally with the circumstances of their own lives, and most people are pretty bad at dealing with rationally kinds of circumstances that they don't deal with that much. So if you have a class of people that are dealing with some topics and not others, they're going to be worse at the ones they're not dealing with. There are certain things that I think are more common pathologies of intellectuals than other people, but I don't know that I would quite classify them as common sense. They tend to feel entitled in the way that people in freer sections of the economy often do not. They are touchy about certain kinds of things, but I don't. Doesn't seem to me like whether they have common sense is quite the way to the best way to conceptualize it. So if you have examples of what you mean, maybe I could say more.
Yep. All right, Cobb, thoughts on the University of Austin? It's been facing some challenges recently.
Yeah, so I should say that I'm friends, not super close, but I'm friends with the president of it. He was my boss at the Salem Center before I moved on from that bit of the University of Texas to the place where I am now, the Civitas Institute. And he moved on from being the head of the Salem Center to being the new president of the University of Austin. I've only talked to him a couple of times since he took that job, and so I'm not like privy to what's going on, but I wish him well for it. I think the University of Austin didn't know what it was doing and made some mistakes early on. I think they losing Steven Pinker in the very beginning was, I think, a real mistake. And I think the reasons that they lost him were that they have a positive vision for what they wanted to do, especially with science. They just didn't want to be woke. But being non-woke is not enough. You need to have an idea for what you're going to do. And they wanted to also be pluralist, right? But pluralism isn't a thing you could be as a university. You have to be something positive, and then you have a plurality of people who disagree with you on things other than the positive vision they were all committed to. And then you can be pluralistic in that respect. And I think the early version of it didn't have any vision for what thing they were going to be, and therefore couldn't be anything except a, in effect, refugee shelter for the canceled, or people who were, in some way opposed to wokeism, but they didn't have much in common. And so there was no, as far as I can tell, real development of a positive identity about what these people are uniting around, except again free speech. But that kind of free speech is not a valid concept. Free speech meant meaning in our institution you could say whatever you want, or in our institution we're not censorious. Free speech is a valid concept if it means what it does mean, which is that nobody could force anyone. Nobody could use the government. Nobody could use a gun. Nobody could use a club. Nobody could use, the instruments of destruction to persecute you for saying what you think. That is what free speech means. But it doesn't mean in my school, in my library, at my organization, you could say whatever you want. If you're going to have a school, if you're going to have any kind of educational institution, obviously you're coming together to say things, and you have to have standards about what things can and can't be said there. Otherwise, you don't have a school. So the idea that we're against cancel culture, we're against censoriousness. What they were against was certain excesses in and too narrow a view of what things were acceptable to say in certain academic contexts. And there was too narrow a view, and there were things that were being excluded that shouldn't be, and there were things to be upset about. But just saying, I don't like the way they do it at Harvard, or I don't like the way they do it at MIT, I think people aren't saying enough things there, does not solve the problem. It just names the problem. And it doesn't even name the problem well. Because what you need is not anybody can say anything. You don't have a university then. You need some sense of what things are going to be said by whom. What are we uniting around? And then when you have that, when you have the idea that here's what our view of what a good curriculum is, here's how we're going to pick professors, here's our view of what counts as quality science or whatever, then you can say the guy that we've hired to be our science professor can think whatever he wants and say whatever he wants about subjects unrelated to science, or whatever he wants that aren't, whatever the rules are. There have to be some rules, right? These are our policies, and we're going to stick to them, and we're not going to have witch hunts and irrational inquiries into the details of people's views that aren't relevant to their work. And moreover, we have a good way of determining what views we're going to teach, what we regard as serious and credible in different fields. And you might have other policies like, and I think it would be a good policy, any student group can bring in anybody to speak. They have to be students in good standing and whatever. And then if they invite someone, maybe there's some limits on what it is. They should be very wide because they think it's part of their education to hear this. They're allowed to. You can come up with policies, but it has to start with some vision of what is our faculty united around as an idea of how to teach. And I think there was a period when they had a bunch of interesting people who disagreed on a lot of other things and agreed there was some problem about academia being too monocultural that could have thought about and come to a decision about what they were going to teach and what their vision for the university was that could have been broader than a conservative university. But when they had that group of people, they didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So they never came up with an answer to that question. And so they didn't really have any vision as far as I could tell. And I spoke to the people who were running it once or twice and no vision emerged other than, in fact, don't be woke. So they were in need of a vision. I think in this period where they didn't have one, they had a lot of interest in them from conservatives. And it's a fine thing to be, I suppose, to be a conservative university. You have to have some kind of identity. And if there's a constituency for them among more conservative students, so be it. I think but that ended up driving out or making uncomfortable some of the people who were there because they wanted it to be pluralist. But I don't think their vision of or hope for a pluralist university without any vision for what the university is about other than pluralism was ever coherent or ever could have worked. So I think it failed and they left. Now it's up to them in the wake of that to try to figure out what they're going to be about. And Carlos has a certain vision, Carlos Cavallo, the new president, about making it about, excellence. It's going to be a place that only takes anybody who has above certain SAT scores and gives them a free ride and gets to giving them a free ride by their donor network and so forth. And so that's a kind of brand that but they need to also figure out like what are their academics going to be about. And I don't know where they are on that. I don't know what they're teaching. I wish them well. I know some people besides Carlos who are teaching there, who are planning to, and I wish them well to figure out what they're going to be, but I don't think they know for sure yet, or if they do, they haven't told me.
Yep. Pablo asked, is the Civitas Institute the same as the Salem Center?
No. It's a little bit complicated and uninterestingly administratively how they're all related, but no, it's a different group within the university that I've kind of moved to.
Andrew asks, opinion on Beethoven. I recognize what Rand said about the malevolence of his sense of life, but his technical mastery is so superb that I don't think he has a benevolent counterpart.
I'm no expert on classical music. Beethoven's obviously a fantastic composer, wrote many great and beautiful pieces, and I don't know that it's fair to say that he's malevolent throughout, although there is some, storminess in many of his pieces. But it seems like there's something strange about like, does he have a benevolent counterpart? Like, he's who he is. He's great at what he does. There's a lot of value to be had there. And there are other values not, and he might not line up with your sense of life. He's not my favorite composer, or one of my top favorites, but he's great.
P. Gupta, how can two people look at the same street recorded video and see different things? Renee ramming into the ICE agent versus trying to drive away.
Well, people often see what they want. And I think in politics, there's a lot of wishful and deluded thinking. But also, and I've not made any close study of the videos, those videos. In situations where it's life and death, quick decisions need to be made, etc. There's it's hard to know what's happening in the moment, like if you were the officer. And also, there's a skill of reconstructing it from multiple sources of evidence. There are people, whose job it is to review these kinds of things and think about officer culpability, and there are different kinds of arguments and so forth. And so it's easy when you're not um, adept at something. And it's your first time watching, somebody in a car crash and somebody shoot someone or whatever. As it's, I haven't watched it these things very many times. It's easy to think you can tell more than you can. And that's not a recipe for skepticism and, oh, I can never tell. Like, what you have to do is, if you really care and you really want to find out what's true here, you listen to a couple of different analyses by different experts, and you listen to what they say about what each other says about it. And I think eventually you can get into a position to have a well-reasoned opinion. I've not done all that work with the particular videos of the things that happened in Minneapolis because, from my perspective, I mean, it matters a lot for how much we hold responsible these particular officers. Um, but I'm not in a position to make a decision about these particular officers. The thing I need to make a decision about is whether I think there ought to be investigations of it, and whether I want to blame the politicians that I have some, small say in voting over, for whether they, allow there to be investigations or not. And I think it's clear that there ought to be proper professional investigations of it. And secondly, I need to make a decision about whether this kind of thing ought to be happening. If you have the kinds of scale of police operations or quasi-policing operations in the kind of conditions that you have with ICE, it's predictable that there are going to be altercations with people where innocent people get killed, or where people get put in positions where, even through no fault of the officers, there are honest confusions or whatever, and somebody gets killed. That's the kind of thing that's going to happen if you're doing this on this kind of scale. And it was known, and people were predicting that this would happen. I think Yaron, in fact, was among the people predicting this would happen before it happened the first time. You can't have attempts to round up millions of people by picking up people off the street or workplaces, arm people, some of them in masks and so forth, and not have situations where somebody makes a mistake, even if it's not ill-intentioned in the part of the person at the moment. Somebody's hot-headed, somebody's confused, somebody acts too quickly, and somebody gets killed. This was going to happen. People were going to die, including innocent people, as soon as this kind of operation was called for. And if there was a need for this kind of operation, if there was some massive crime problem in the country where millions of people needed to be found and rounded up because of some emergency, where millions of people were dying every day because of it, so we needed to do this, we would have to expect that there would be collateral damage of some people dying in it, because that's what's required in this kind of operation. In fact, there's no need for this. The whole thing is ridiculous and absurd. It's a made-up problem that there's just no need for anything like this. There are crime problems, and there are things that need to be done about the crime problems, but none of it is anything like what's happening now with ICE. And it's because of that, because of those policy decisions, much more than because of anything these particular officers did, that these people are dead. And much more than because of any bad decisions made by particular protesters, although I'm sure have been cases of that too. So if you're trying to decide for sure whether this particular thing was murder and whether this person, yeah, you need to go look at those videos. A lot of people don't really care about what's true about that, but are looking at those videos to kind of fuel their political rage and grievance, and one way or the other, and play team sports like a political football with it. And they're going to see whatever they look for to see, because they don't care what's true. If you are really looking and trying to figure out what's true, you can do it, and it takes work. And I haven't done it with the amount of work that it would require. But I don't think you need to know where the essential fault for what's happening here really lies. And it's with the people who made the policy decisions to deal with immigration in the way that we're dealing with it now, and the people who've empowered them to do it.
Daniel, do you think there's a reasonable chance better people on the left will start having an appreciation for limited government after Trump's train wreck?
Yes, I think it's certain that some better people on the left will, some already have, and better people on the right for that matter. The question is whether those people will have much control over the agenda of the Democratic Party. And likewise, whether the parallel people will regain some kind of control over the Republican Party. So there are all kinds of people who you see writing articles saying why we need more checks on executive power, and some of them are even saying, "Boy, I didn't realize in the past when my party was in charge how much we needed these checks, but I do now." You'll find people saying that. There are articles. I can't remember the names of the particular authors who've done it now. So that's happening among some people, but are there enough of them, and will they be in power? That I think we don't know yet. It's too early to say.
Cop says, what are your thoughts on Helen Andrews and the debates she's been stirring?
I don't recognize that name. Do you know it?
Yeah, she's written stuff on the feminization of
Oh,
occult.
oh, that person. Yes. I remember that article. If it's the article I'm thinking of, it was ridiculous. I mean, the idea that women are so emotional and the workplace has become emotional because women are so emotional and so forth, as though there's anything, you couldn't be more emotionalistic than Trump or than the MAGA movement.
Yeah.
And then a lot of masculine coded things. So I think there are ways in which, you know, um, some masculine coded things and masculine coded traits have been de-emphasized and some feminine coded ones more emphasized. And there are some particular fields and situations in which you might think that was done badly or went too far and so forth. But and that's probably true. But the particular claims of the article that I read, um, I think were silly. I think in general, there's a need for a rethinking of various traits associated with masculinity and femininity, both.
Mhm.
There are bad and toxic forms of each. And I think it is true that there's been a kind of hostility towards masculinity and maleness that, targets bad traits of many men or toxic in so-called forms of masculinity, but doesn't seek to deal with them by replacing them with healthier forms of it and can create a kind of anti-male zeitgeist and so forth. And that's a bad thing. And I think it's bad for young men in particular, growing up without role models and guidance. And there's lots to say about that. But those aren't the points that that article about the feminization of culture was on about.
Shazbot, this is a quote from Andor. Have you seen Andor?
I saw the first season and liked it a lot.
Yeah.
And my wife and I want to see the first season, but we just have the second season, but we just haven't found the time when we're both available to watch it. And it's the top of our list, but we're going to watch it soon.
So here's a quote. Of all the things at risk, the loss of an objective reality is perhaps the most dangerous. This is from Mon Mothma. And he asks, could some writers be influenced by objectivism without even realizing it?
Sure, they might be influenced and realize it. I don't know who wrote that.
Yeah.
It's a good line. I don't think you can only get that from Rand. For one thing, you might get some of that idea from Orwell, although he himself might have gotten it from Rand. I'm not sure. And the current political moment is so flagrantly anti-objectivity that you see a lot of people speaking up in defense of it, sometimes in confused ways. So there are multiple things that could have motivated that line. I don't remember that line. I don't know if it's from
Could be
the
a
season
second
I
season.
saw or the one I haven't seen yet.
Yeah.
But it could
You
be
have
a
to
lot
get
of people have read Ayn Rand. A lot of writers have read Ayn Rand and
exactly. Yeah.
um, you know, been influenced consciously or subconsciously.
Yep. It's second season. First two episodes are weird, but once you get over them, it's really good.
We're gonna watch it. We just haven't gotten to it yet. Our very good friends moved next door to us, and that somewhat changed our television watching habits because sometimes we're watching it with them, and sometimes they're
Yeah.
watching. And so, like it hasn't transpired that the two of us who haven't seen Andor have been wanting to watch television with just the two of us for enough things in a row that it made sense to have that. But the day will come soon.
It will happen. It will happen. All right. You have to get the other two to watch the first season.
No, they have. They've seen the second. They're ahead of us. That's the issue.
Oh, they're
Yeah,
ahead of you. Oh.
right. So now, yeah.
Uh, uh, P. Gupta, is it too early to protest in the streets against some law enforcement not time for a revolution yet?
It's not time for a revolution yet. Protesting against law enforcement. Well, which ones and how and with what goals? I think it's important in a protest that you have some sense of what would count as success. What are the goals? It's not just you're mobbing up the streets and bothering everybody's life, and it's not clear what would count as success and how this is supposed to lead to it. So I think that for there to be a proper protest, there needs to be like, a the equivalent of an investment thesis, but like, a thesis for what you're trying to accomplish and how you're going to accomplish it this way. And I think protesting against ICE, probably there are good ways to do it. And I think probably it's happening in some good ways, but I don't know all the details and I don't want to endorse all the ones that are happening because I don't know enough about them. I don't know what other law enforcement it would be appropriate to protest right now. I'm sure there might be cases, but I don't know.
Daniel, do you think Trump's stupidity and incompetence will be enough to sink the authoritarian right for a while, or is that wishful thinking?
I don't know so much that it's the stupidity and incompetence as the fact that, I mean, one way to think of it is that Donald Trump is a national temper tantrum. And this version of the administration is the temper tantrum is being allowed to play out rather than being reined in by saner forces that are having some success in harnessing it to do their bidding.
Mhm.
And the country is better than a temper tantrum, and enough people see it as juvenile and bad and want to move away from it. And I think that's what there are signs of is happening. And but I don't think it's an issue of stupidity exactly. It's this administration is, I believe, more evil and irrational than the country, and then the country is prepared to tolerate. And so I think we'll get a big backlash against it. But it's a matter of irrationality, not of stupidity. I don't think someone who's more competent could have done it better.
Yeah.
Maybe they could have been more quiet about it or brought it in more subtly, but I also don't think they would have come to power. It's the temper tantrumy nature of it is why he came to power in the first place.
Cobb says, why is Hollywood so liberal? Is it because conservatives are gate kept out, or are conservatives not good at creating art?
There, if you believe in Christianity, you should be a socialist. You should have the political views of wanting to tear down wealth and tear down capitalism, because it's transparently inconsistent with the religion. It's part of what Jesus was about, and there's no respectable or coherent intellectual position that is pro-business, pro-capitalism, pro-freedom, and religion, and pro-religion. There are lots of people who will tell you there is. There are lots of people who think there is. There are some very smart people who, I think, basically deceive themselves into thinking that, but it doesn't make sense. And the fact that it doesn't make sense is accessible to anyone who knows much about religion. And to anyone who knows much about the morality that has been inherited from religion to, the rest of the culture, basically. So people who take morals and ideals seriously, unless they're objectivists, tend to be anti-business, anti-wealth, anti-capital. And in a culture where that's the case, because people haven't done the really radical thing you need to do to understand and defend what's good about freedom, what's good about capitalism, why business is a noble pursuit. The people who are more concerned about ideas, who are more really concerned about those kinds of spiritual values, and who are more concerned about being consistent and coherent, are going to tend to go left. And the people who are more conservative are the people who are trying to retain how society was in their grandfather's day without following the logic of the premises that their grandfathers held. They want a little more they want a little more economic freedom because that's how things used to be, and they want a little more religion because that's how things used to be. And in some cases, they want a lot more of those things, but it's not because there's some coherent or spiritual affinity between the things. There's just a timidity and a longing for the past that binds the various things that bind the conservative movement. But that set of values, a kind of longing for yesterday, when the things in yesterday don't go together, are not the kinds of things that are consistent with a creative disposition. And so it's not going to be what's most common among creative individuals, and therefore not what's going to be common among the artists in the culture. It's also not what's going to be common among intellectuals. And it's in the logic of the contradiction between capitalism and altruism that any movement that tries to merge altruism equals Christianity and capitalism is going to be a movement populated by less intellectually and spiritually adventurous people, by more timid, less smart people. There are, of course, exceptions, and there are lots of bad people everywhere and decent people everywhere. But like by and large, that's what you're going to find, and that's why you get what has been called by some a low human capital problem on the right. I don't quite love that term, but there's something right about it, and low artistic interest on the right.
Mhm.
Again, there are always exceptions, but that's, if you want a kind of broad brushstroke answer, that's why. You need to get a creative, powerful, spiritually ascendant, and intellectually ascendant right. You need to challenge Christianity or give up on capitalism and have a right that's just, wanting to go whole hog nihilistically back to the Middle Ages, which is what we're getting.
P. Gupta, let's see. My Indian immigrant colleague is distressed about explaining to her kids the presence of ice and not allowing them outside on their own unless absolutely necessary. Any tips for her?
That's hard. I mean, I'm worried about how to explain these things to children who don't yet have to modify their day-to-day life around it. How old are the kids? Did she say?
Yeah, she didn't say.
I think the things to try to do in telling the kids at whatever level is appropriate for how old the kids are is to identify this as evil and as an ancient and dangerous evil that is proliferating in a part of our society right now and that we have to be worried about. Yet to find a way to do that that doesn't make it metaphysical and make the world seem like a scary place, and that confines it to the journalistic level. These people are here now. We have to worry about them. Here's what we have to do to deal with them and to keep ourselves safe from them. And there are other forces in the world that are fighting them, and that there's reason to think will prevail. And you have to judge how good reason do you think there is to prevail. But it's very much, and I don't think if you're somebody who's actually faced with this, it's very much like, what do you tell your daughter Anne when you're up in the attic?
Yeah, they're 8 and 14, which I think are ages where they can have some appreciation for what you just said.
And you can say that it's not the same thing as the Nazis, and I said that it wasn't the same as the Nazis before, and that's true, but that doesn't matter if you're someone who's in danger of being dragged away by them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right, lone dissenter. I don't like how some objectivists use malevolent. For example, Beethoven was malevolent. Maybe he had the malevolent universe premise, but some use the word sloppily.
I agree with
Outsiders
that.
and newcomers don't know we mean tragic, not evil.
I agree with that about both malevolent and benevolent. So it sometimes gets used as short for the malevolent universe premise or the benevolent universe premise, but being a benevolent person is not the same thing as having the benevolent universe premise. They tend to correlate, but they're not the same thing. and likewise for malevolent and the malevolent universe. So point well taken.
Yeah. Cobb, is the fact that Jimmy Kimmel is still on air evidence that free speech is still protected, even when the Trump administration wants him off the air?
Um, it's protected by the fact that there was a real backlash, right? It's under threat in a way that it has not been in our lifetimes. But there's, people will only stand for so much, and um, and there was a real backlash against the pulling of Jimmy Kimmel, as there was, I should note, a real backlash against some of what Newton Minow was up to in the '60s, right? But this was much more uh, a direct assault on political speech than what we were seeing back then, and it's I think much more calculated to try to shut up opponents of the regime than the kinds of things that Rand was concerned about during the Kennedy administration, which I also think were that, but just less overtly so. Um, I think these are trial balloons, and they've not all, gone over successfully, right? There's been pushback, not as much pushback as there should have been, but some. The right response to the Jimmy Kimmel thing was everybody in the country demanding that Carr be fired, and if he wasn't fired in a day, that Trump be impeached. That did not happen. That's the right response in parallel to almost everything Trump does. His every third utterance is an impeachable act. And we don't have nearly the amount of disgust that is needed and is appropriate. But there is some, and enough that at some point he gets nervous enough about what the Republicans say, and will they follow him in Congress, and will they continue to support him, that he backs down. And this particular thing, Ted Cruz was good on, and that was one of the better things he did. And I think he's one of the people who had some effect here. But there's some pushback. Trump can't get away with whatever he wants, but he's gotten away with a lot more than anybody should be able to get away with. And that is concerning. And we have to see, it's too early yet to know what the result will be and what kind of pushback we'll find electorally and what kind of legislative agenda that will result in. But what we really need is a legislative agenda, an agenda not just of getting rid of this particular president, but of it leading to a consensus of constraining presidential power, constraining executive power. And we've not had that yet. It's too early to know if we will, but it's what the country needs.
Pub says, is Curtis Yarvin a pseudo-intellectual?
I think so, yes. I have a little line about him, but I don't know how. So there's this character. I read a lot about musicians, musicians that I like, and it's a kind of, I just started when I was a kid, and even though I don't think it's the most important field in the world, once you start knowing a lot about something, it's kind of fun to learn more of the details, and you start to see interesting facts about other parts of the world in microcosm in it. And so I know a lot about the Beatles' lives and their circle. And there was this guy, kind of charlatan grifter, basically, who hung around them named Magic Alex, who was really good at talking to successful people who didn't know much about electronics, people who were very good in their own domains and tended to be irreverent and hippie-ish and whatever, about how we could make all these kind of fantastic electronics gizmos. And the Beatles ended up putting him in charge of the electronics division of their company, and he tried to build them a recording studio and claimed he could have wallpaper that was also speakers and so forth. And none of his stuff worked. They had to throw it all out. He was just basically a huckster, but who was very good at talking to people in a certain cultural milieu and able to take in really smart people, smart in other fields, who didn't know much about this in that cultural milieu. And I have the sense that Yarvin is sort of like a Magic Alex of political philosophy, very good at talking to tech founders and people who are really good in that space about issues that they don't know that much about, and saying things that are kind of obvious and fairly obviously wrong and not that interesting, but making them sound profound to that audience. So that's my sense of him. But in fairness, I haven't studied him in any great depth. I don't really see much of a need to. Nothing I've seen that he said has been at all interesting or the slightest bit intelligent.
Any thoughts on Rene Girard's philosophy?
I don't know that much about him. He's very influential on Peter Thiel, I gather, and I've read a few like articles about him, third hand or whatever. But I've not made a study.
Mike, let's see. Is there anything of value in the ancient Stoics that can be retained once their determinism is rejected?
I think in essence, no, nothing that's really distinctive to them. But there are candidates. So there's some bits of good, like moderate life advice in Aurelius and so forth, but it's pretty constrained. I don't I wouldn't say it's something on the par of the things that are bad about them that you want to kind of sort them out. But on here or there they have good bits of advice. Um, the best thing I would say is the cosmopolitanism, the idea of being a citizen of the world in the way that you're a citizen of your city that you get in some Stoic writers. But I haven't given enough thought to that and to its, you know, are there other people who are making to what extent are they really distinctive in saying that? And how does that relate to the worst things in their thought? But that I would say is the most promising to me vein to mind in the Stoics.
Right. Let's see. Monotropic. Could all human knowledge be expressed in the form of algorithms?
Uh, no, I don't think so. It might be that there are some algorithms on which our brains run that in some sense underlie, that I don't mean to, by saying no, I don't mean to deny that there's some system that algorithms are importantly involved in that might underwrite consciousness or something. But I don't think the content of knowledge is algorithms or algorithmic.
Yep. Newly Dan, what does it mean for philosophy to be a system of ideas?
It's a good question. So you want to think about what is a system of ideas in general, and then in what sense is, I wouldn't say philosophy is one, I would say a philosophy is one, because philosophy is a kind of field, and then there's a philosophy within it. So think about um, there are a bunch of claims that are interrelated such that some explain one another, and they could be used to interpret different things, and they work together, well, like as a system. So think about how the Darwinian theory of evolution is a system, right? And Darwinian evolution is a system. And then you think about the Darwinian Mendelian synthesis. So you take the theory of evolution by natural selection, right, from Darwin, and you combine it with the Mendelian theory of genes, and then you're thinking, well, the genes are the units over which selection is happening. You have a kind of more and more complex system of biological thought, right? So that's what's meant for there to be a system of ideas. There are different ideas making different claims about different things, different identifications of different facts, or attempted identifications. Maybe they're false in some cases, right? Um, but they work together to explain and to integrate observations on a greater scale than anyone could alone. And that's what a system of ideas is. And then a philosophy is like that. It's not just one idea about ethics or one idea about how to know or one idea about politics, etc. But it's a bunch of interrelated ideas that are more than the sum of their parts in the way that Mendelian genetics and Darwinian theory of natural selection are more than the sum of their parts when you combine them. So likewise, a philosophical system. Um, there are ideas that are mutually illuminating and that explain more of reality when interconnected. So that's off the top of my head. I've never kind of thought about that issue per se before, but what I would say about that, the general strategy is you want to think about what it means for ideas to be a system in other fields, and then it's like that in philosophy too.
Abraham has a question from ChatGPT.
That is, ChatGPT came up with a question.
I guess. Is the law of identity and objectivism purely metaphysical, or does it also impose constraints on the admissible epistemic models?
That sounds very GPT-ish. It makes less sense the more you think about it. So if it applies, let's just change the last bit for a moment to imply constraints on thinking. Why would that make it not purely metaphysical. Like it's a claim about reality, and in that sense, it's purely metaphysical. But what we know about reality has implications for how we should think. So it has implications for epistemology. It also has implications for ethics, right? But it's a metaphysical truth that has implications, important implications for epistemology and ethics. And that's what I think about the law of identity. But then the way he put it was not implications for epistemology, but always constraints on epistemic models,
Yeah.
something like that. So I take it that that's a kind of
Unadmissible epistemic models.
admissible epistemology. So I don't know exactly what that means, but it's a kind of we could have another question about the way the word model is used and what's right and wrong about it in various circles. So I won't get into that now unless someone wants to ask about it. But interpreting it as like what things you may think, what things it's rational to think, then yes, the law of identity has implications for that. That makes it epistemological in its implications, but something can be purely metaphysical, so to speak, that is itself solely making a claim about reality, and yet have epistemic things based on it. It gets taken up by epistemology and ethics.
Lucinda asks, outside of cats or dogs, what's your favorite animal?
Why outside of them? Why they're not contenders for my favorite animal.
They're not contenders for this one.
I'm not. I don't have pets. I've never particularly wanted a pet, so I don't think of myself as much of an animal lover. I like watching. I guess I like watching birds out the window, although my wife will be mad at me because people get to be a certain age and they become bird watchers, and she's resistant to
Please
that
don't do
as a
that.
trend, worried it'll happen to us. So I'm not on my way to being a bird watcher, but when I've enjoyed watching animals, they have more often been birds than other animals.
All right. I like lions.
Oh yeah, lions are great, but I never get to see
Lions are
them.
cool. Yeah. Cobb, are music and sports areas of modern life where racism is mostly not a factor?
Um, I think it's less of a factor, and it's a factor in different ways. So I think in music and sports, well, it probably goes by sport, right? So there's something curious culturally about the respect in which different sports and different genres of music are remain so closely associated with races, with ancestral groups. It shows that we are, and it's not like, white people are better at croquet and black people are better at basketball. There's no plausible biological theory. It's cultural. It's like this is the sport that's popular in this area, and this is the sport that's popular in this area, and people from these two communities aren't mixing so much that it's getting equally popular everywhere, right? In a society that was moving past race, um, generation after generation, there would be less and less of that. There would be less and less of distinct black and white communities. But the communities persist, and even the races persist, as a function of the fact that people view these as important in who they associate with. And so, in that sense, the whole like phenomenon of, sports and forms of music that are mostly black or mostly white is all a fact of the continuing race consciousness of our society, a society that as it gets better will get past race altogether. But that said, music and sports are fields in which, within a given sport, or within a given genre of music, I think there's a lot more enthusiasm for people who are really good at it, even if they're from a social background that you wouldn't expect, and so forth. Now, in the sports, it's a little different because it's more, there's an objective measure of how good you are at it. The game of the sport, the goal of the sport is to throw this ball through this hoop or run this fast or whatever, and we can tell, who's best at it. In the case of the arts, particularly music, a lot of the appeal of music is is being exposed to something that seems to you exotic or different, or on the other hand, familiar. And so if somebody's the best rock and roll guitarist or the best blues singer or rapper or operetta singer or whatever it is, uh, part of what's going on is that, and if you're interested in that music, part of what you're liking about it is a cultural artifact, and probably part of what you like about it is something about how it seems familiar or distant from you culturally. And so attitudes towards race are a part of that. And I think they're a part of it in kind of subtle and difficult to process ways that are evolving as the culture evolves. So there's a lot to say about that. I know more about it and I've thought more about it in music because I know more about music in sports and know more about genres of music that have, um, origins in Black American communities.
Baycast, do you watch the Winter Olympics? Would the Olympics be better without the nationalistic element? Any ideas what Rand would think of the Paralympics?
I don't really watch any sports much, including the Olympics, so I don't have much to say about them. Um, I don't think there's anything objectionable about the nationalism of them. Countries are fine. It's fine to root for your country in optional things, and could be good and could be a good bonding experience. And I don't think there's anything wrong with sports and sports teams being identified with states or towns or countries. So long as your country's not wicked, I don't think there's anything wrong with rooting for a sports team. But I'm just not into that. Um, I think Rand would probably have been almost certainly have been put off by the Paralympics, but and seen it as. But I don't know very much about them and don't have an opinion myself.
Lucinda asks, how important is it for me to study math if I'm only planning to go into, if I'm not planning to go into any math-heavy line of work? How big are the benefits to general thinking that one gets from math?
Well, I mean, how much do you know? I mean, like if you didn't know how to add or do basic algebra or something, I would say the benefits are huge. But I'm assuming you're like someone in your 20s, uh, who's in university and so forth. So you're going to know basic math already, and then I would say um, not that big. I mean, it could be huge for different fields, but there there's a lot to be learned by studying everything, and you can't study everything. And so you've got to follow your interests and what particular connections you see towards what you're interested in. So if you need to know more math, um, you'll get signs of it. Like, it keeps coming up in things that you're studying or analogies to it, and then you'll have a reason to do it. And if you don't feel any particular pull or reason to study more math now, then I wouldn't worry about it. And likewise for other fields.
Can you please explain the concept and fact of the eternity of the universe and how to integrate it with the rest of my knowledge?
Well, time is in the universe. Time is a feature of the universe. The universe isn't something that exists within time. And I think that's the key point. There's no kind of question of what was around before the universe or what will be there after the universe, or is there a before? There is no such thing as a before or after the universe. And I think that's the essential point to know about the universe. Um, a separate kind of question is there a beginning within the universe? People who believe in the eternity of the universe, certainly Aristotle, um, thought no. They thought like, the universe goes in cycles and the cycles go back infinitely, and there was no first moment and so forth like that. And that may well be true. I think Ayn Rand thought that was true. I'm not convinced that we can know that to be true on philosophical grounds. Maybe the universe had a kind of first thing in it or something like that. But if so, there was no before that first thing. I think that's a kind of separate question and separate from what I really think the eternity of the universe means, which is that time and temporality is a feature within the universe, and there's no such thing as before or after it. And then questions about um, whether there's kind of going back infinitely in time or finitely in time and things like that are questions about how temporality works within the universe where it is. And I have no reason to think that there was a first. Yeah, I just don't have any opinions on that. But I am skeptical that you can. I don't. I think that's sort of a physics question rather than a philosophy of time question or something. Although I'm pretty confident that Ayn Rand thought that the universe was eternal on philosophical grounds, and Aristotle certainly thought so.
Tom says, is true fact a valid concept without the concept of consciousness? Are true and untrue the fundamental epistemological distinctions and then error?
Um, I think the fundamental epistemological concept is knowledge, and then truth is a um, singles out one feature of knowledge that some things that aren't knowledge can also have. Truth is the property of a judgment of corresponding to reality, and knowledge. Some knowledge is in the form of judgments, and those judgments have truth. They correspond to reality. So that's how I think of it. Um, so true is true. The thing that true is a predicate of is a judgment or a kind of thought, not of the fact. But it's kind of shorthand to say true fact. I don't think it's it's a kind in one sense it's kind of redundant because if it wasn't true it wouldn't be a fact, and then in another sense it's colloquial, and I don't see any real need to use, but I also don't think it's a harmful colloquialism.
Jonathan, have you seen any Star Trek? How do you evaluate its exploration of philosophical issues, what it means to be a person, or any other you find interesting?
I've seen a lot of Star Trek. I've seen all of the Next Generation many times. I've seen most of the original series at one time or another. I've seen many. I don't know if I've seen all of the movies, but most of them. And I've seen a fair amount of Deep Space Nine back when it was on. And I haven't seen much of the other various spin-off series. My favorite is as you might guess from that I said I saw it many times. My favorite is The Next Generation. What do I think of its exploring of philosophical issues? Um, Sometimes it does that well. It's often interesting and thought-provoking on subjects. I don't think that's what it's best at, but and it's not why I watch or like it, but I think it often does that well in particular episodes. What I most like about it, and particularly about the Next Generation, is I think that the character of Picard is a real hero. I think he's a concretization of a kind of pro-reason, pro-intellect masculinity that is good. And I think he's one version of a hero within a kind of world of several. And I think that is good. It also, the Star Trek franchise in general, carries some of this pro-reason, pro-enlightenment, pro-human optimism that I mentioned before in connection with Maria Montessori. It's one of the um, that's a kind of 19th and early 20th century uh, cultural motif that kind of got into the later 20th century through a few different cultural avenues, and Star Trek is one of the more popular.
Let's see. All right. One of the first issues with Trump was that he wouldn't release his tax information. How big of an issue was this?
Um, well, it's not just that he wouldn't release it, but that he lied about it, right? If he said, I don't like this what do you call it? This custom that we release our tax information. It's a it's only a tradition and it's not a good one, and I don't like it. And I think it's particularly burdensome for someone in my position who's run companies and so forth, and I don't want to do it. And that was his position from the beginning. I don't think I would have liked it, but I would have, you could have respected it, and you could have respected people who didn't care about it. But when he's promising the people who are voting for him and his supporters that he's going to do it, and then comes up with transparent lies about why he's not going to, um, then I think that is a real issue, and people should have been concerned about it, and it should have made them not vote for him because he was lying to them about it. But it didn't, and so we are where we are.
All right, final two questions. Daniel asks, best guitarist of all time.
Of all time, I mean, it's so many different genres of music and so many different. It seems, how do you compare? Like what Segovia is doing and what I don't know, BB King are doing are so different. I don't know. Segovia is more talented than BB King, though I like BB King a great deal. But I would say maybe Django Reinhardt. Certainly, if you exclude classical, Django's, I think, my favorite.
Okay.
And if we're focused on skill and creativity and having really done something new.
All right, and the final question, Greg, who would you pick as your sideman on harp? Little Walter, Junior Wells, James Cotton, or Sonny Boy 2, or someone else?
Um, of those two, my favorites are Little Walter and Junior Wells, but it's hard to imagine either of them. I mean, they've both been sidemen for Muddy Waters, but other than that, who could they be on the side for? I think Little Walter is the best blues harmonica player, with Junior Wells as a close second.
All right, I think this is the longest interview I've ever done.
Right. Hopefully it was
3 hours and
lucrative
20
and not too
minutes. No,
boring.
this is good. It's good.
Good.
Lots and lots of questions. Thank you, Greg. Thanks.
Thank you. It was
for
really great
answering
seeing
all
you
this.
this weekend and look forward to
Yes,
seeing you more soon.
absolutely.
Right.
Bye, Greg.
Bye.
Bye,
Bye all.
everybody. I'll see you guys tomorrow.